All right, 11 minutes after 3 o'clock. Thank you so much for joining us. And that is East Africa time. And we're super excited to be on this call today. Welcome to the fourth Great Lakes Policy Roundtable, where we are discussing issues affecting us as a continent and think tanking around solutions. So why are we having this conversation today? We are having this conversation today because we are celebrating Africa Industrialization Week, and that is according to the UN that every 20th of November, stretching through that week, we discuss how far we have gone in terms of industrializing as a continent. But we've been really talking about industrializing for quite a while as a continent. So I thought that would background a little bit on the journey that we've started on since 1979. Africa was having a conversation around industrialization. And of course, 1979 starts off with the Monrovia Declaration, where we had African leaders who went to Liberia and just had conversations around Africa's development agenda, largely anchored on industrialization. The heads of states from all across the continent shared, among others, to focus on how do they actually industrialize the continent. And that gave birth to the 1980 Lagos Plan of Action. In 1980, again, African heads of state looked at industrialization as a way to grow Africa's economy, and they earmarked from 1980 to 2000 as a whole time to industrialize Africa and put it up on the global map. And that goes without saying that in 1982, it was the Organization of African Union on the 20th of November, on 20th of November 1989, they said that we shall be having the Africa Industrialization Day, which is why we're here today. We've had a series of conversations. In 2001, we had the New Economic Partnership. And of course, there was also an agreement between African heads of state. And in 2016, the UN General Assembly adopted a resolution to describe 2016 to 2025 as the third industrial development decade for Africa. Now, the very latest is 2018 March, when our African leaders met in Kigali, Rwanda, and signed the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. What that basically meant is that we could trade easily. You know, when I'm talking about a farmer in Kabale, that they can actually export Irish potatoes to Lagos, Nigeria, to be served in, one of the restaurants there without having to go through all, the barriers, and it would help us trade better. But where are we? Think about it. The Africa Continental Free Trade Area we were supposed to start trading in January this year. We're closing up the year, but up to now, some countries have not actually submitted their instruments to the Secretariat in Accra, Ghana, including Tanzania, by the way. Still conversations happening within, I was in Arusha a couple of weeks back, and Tanzania hadn't, of the East African states, handed in their instruments. But let's bring it home. We're all talking about Africa, 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 Africa. How about the different blocks that we have formed since then? Let's look at the East African Community, for example, where we signed the East African Common Markets Protocol, and that was supposed to help us to trade better. What is happening right now, even with the whole infrastructure done, with the agreement signed, with everyone pushing that we can achieve this, we still have issues. Rwanda closed its borders to Uganda. Kenya has rejected Ugandan products. Kenya rejected Tanzanians' products until when Tanzania also, flexed some muscles and they resolved some of those grievances. Now they can trade, but there are about 24 more cases which they have not sorted with. Burundi is having issues with Tanzania. Burundi is having issues with Rwanda. Basically, this whole chaos of our farmers, of Kenya saying that we are importing sugar from other countries and we are repackaging it here, that our food has aflatoxins. All these issues speak about whether we are ready to trade and whether industrialization still remains at the core of it. So today we want to take a deep dive. How do we move from just conversation to action? And that's the theme for this conversation today. And we're super excited to be having different speakers. We have a great panel today, and we want to say a special thank you to the Great Lakes Institute for Strategic Studies for organizing this, this discussion today. And the hashtag, if you're on Twitter, hashtag is Great Lakes Policy Talks. So you can go and put out a tweet. We'll be giving you an opportunity to speak back so that we continue with the conversation. And we have a number of people who will be speaking to us. I've also been assured that Mr. Silva Ojako, the Chief of Staff for the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat, will be speaking to us, and he will be giving us a keynote address. He'll be live from Accra in Ghana to talk to us about where we are. But hey, let's get the show started by, I want to invite Godba Tumushabe, who is the Associate Director at the Great Lakes Institute for Strategic Studies, to come and give us his opening remarks and welcoming remarks to officially welcome us to this discussion. Godba, you are very welcome, sir.
A very good afternoon to everybody from wherever you are across the continent and across the world. My name is Godba Tumushabe. I'm an Associate Director at the Great Lakes Institute for Strategic Studies. We are very delighted to have you on this forum, the 4th Great Lakes Policy Roundtable series. We are very delighted that we were able to partner with the Ministry of Trade, Tourism and Industry in convening this forum to be able to discuss issues of industrialization on the continent. As the moderator has indicated, this is a debate that goes back 4 decades. The continent has been talking, the leaders talking, practitioners trying everything possible to be able to move the industrialization agenda. But I think every report, every assessment that has been made basically shows that we've fallen short of most of our commitments and timelines that we have committed to. So as part of our tradition at the Great Lakes Institute for Strategic Studies, we've been organizing and convening stakeholders, convening practitioners, convening policymakers to be able to really challenge ourselves and be able to ask those fundamental questions that normally we fear talking about as politicians, as diplomats. So basically make this conversation more, make it more homely, so that we can be able to ask and challenge ourselves and ask the hard questions of what else do we need to do to be able to accelerate the pace of industrialization on the continent. I think looking at the new plan for Africa's development, the Africa Agenda 2063, the Green Manufacturing Strategy for Africa, the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, it is very apparent that in terms of consensus on where we need to go, it's very clear. I don't think that is in doubt. The fundamental question for us to ask ourselves as Africans, policymakers and practitioners is, what is it that we need to do that we haven't been able to do in the past that we can be able to, to trigger a new revolution that moves Africa's industrialization agenda forward? Because I think that without industrialization as a continent, we are unable to add value to our products, our immense resources. As a continent, we are not able to create new jobs for the millions of young people that are graduating into our job market. As Africans, we are not able to reduce poverty from among many of rural and urban populations. So this is why we are convening these dialogues, cutting across different areas from trade to industry, to climate change, to business and governance. So I really want to take this opportunity once again to welcome all of you and thank you for joining us. And I'm hoping that we'll have an exciting 3-hour discussion. Let me end by saying that from this conversation, we'll be producing a policy memorandum that captures the key issues that come out of this conversation that we can be able to share with a wide range of stakeholders and African continental agencies and regional organizations that we are able to pick some of those ideas and put them on the table so that we can see how they can help us to move forward. On that note, I would want to yield back to the moderator. Thanks very much once again for joining us this afternoon.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's Godbert Mushave there, the Associate Director at the Great Lakes Institute for Strategic Studies, who are convening this conversation, and a special thank you to the Ministry of Trade for partnering with us today on this call. And speaking of the Ministry of Trade, I want to invite Mr. Dennis Ainebiona, who is the Commissioner of Trade, the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Cooperatives under the government of Uganda, to also give his opening remarks. Mr. Dennis Ainebiona, you are very welcome.
Thank you, Solomon. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Dennis Ainebiona.
Dennis, people want to see you, just to be sure that we're not talking to machines. So maybe if you could just open your camera a little bit while you're giving your opening remarks, please.
Thank you, Solomon. That is the face of Dennis Ainebiona. I do work with the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Cooperatives as the Acting Commissioner, Industry and Technology. Let me take this opportunity to welcome you to this policy dialogue, and also to again thank you for participating in one of the important activities for the commemoration of the Africa Industrialization Day. As the Minister of Trade, Industry and Cooperatives, this year we decided to take it to another level and have a week long of activities to be able to commemorate the Africa Industrialization Day and engage and have serious interactive sessions with a number of stakeholders to be able to really discuss this important subject of industrialization. Indeed, Solomon, as you have said, and Godba, also as government, we show high commitment to industrialization for purposes of taking part and on the benefits from it, be able to ensure we address the needs of the population. It is very clear to us as the government, it is through taking this journey to industrialization that we should be able to really create the decent jobs for our people, that we should be able to really trade very well with our neighbors and increase household incomes. And so we take this subject seriously. And if you take a reflection also from our national development plan, we really emphasize the importance of industrialization. I really want to use this opportunity to thank GLISS, who have worked closely in this, and to be able to mobilize all the stakeholders. Today, I'm very much excited that the discussion now has moved from the national level. Now we are discussing as Africa, and this is very, 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 very important. The situation in Uganda is not different from what is in Ghana, what is in Namibia, and therefore I'm looking at having a good to enable us move forward. I just want to also use this opportunity to inform the platform and the members who are really listening through that as a country or as a government, we recently revised our national industrialization policy, and the desire is to increase the manufacturing value added. At the moment, we are at 8.3%, and we would really wish to double this. And the strategy is two-pronged, is to reduce on the importation, but largely increase on the imports, taking the advantage of the resources we have in terms of the raw materials, in terms of the labor, and also the positioning of the country. And I really look forward to engage with you in this discussion. Let's have open engagements. We will take seriously the recommendations that come from this engagement. Thank you so much, and thank you, GLISS. Over to you, back to Solomon Serwanja.
Denis Neviona is the acting commissioner for industry under the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Cooperatives. May I just also add that I think the industrialization is very core in Uganda's National Development Plan. If you look at the Uganda National Development Plan, there is some sort of direction where the country is going. I have had an opportunity to read it, and government has a dream of setting up 25 industrial parks. So far, they have set up about 10 of them in different parts of the country, including Kasese, Jinja, there's one in Namamve, among others. And the Uganda Investments Authority, in collaboration with the Ministry of Industry, was also going around the country trying to secure as much land as they can to have about 5,000 acres for each of these industrial parks. They're promising us 1.5 million jobs over the next 3-4 years. So hopefully we can be able to do that. But really the core is going to go into whether there is the political will to do these things, right? We have all these plans, the National Development Plan, anchored on, industrialization. We're talking about how do we attract foreign direct investment to put up factories, the incentives that we're giving to people out of the country to come and invest and build factories and industries here. Are we also incentivizing the local investors here to set up industries, and how are we actually helping them? Is our policies lined in achieving our industrial agenda as a continent, but also as a region and as a country, Uganda? You'll allow me to use a case study of Uganda whilst we're having a continental conversation. I'll be back and forth to Uganda, but later we're also going to be integrating the entire picture of the African continent as a whole. Speaking of the African continent, we ratified to the Africa Continental Free Trade Area back in March in 2018 in Kigali, Rwanda, where most of the countries, even the one that had refused to sign, eventually signed. I think Nigeria took baby steps to sign that. But eventually we have all agreed that we have to trade and we need to work together. But do we even have what to trade is the question. But let me invite Mr. Silva Ojakol. Mr. Silva Ojakol is from the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat in Accra, Ghana. He's going to be giving us a keynote address. He is the Chief of Staff at the AFCTA Secretariat and is representing the Secretary General Wamkele Mune to give his keynote address. So we're really excited to have you, Mr. Silva Ojakol, and the floor is yours.
Solomon Serwanja, moderator for this session. We would like, on behalf of the Secretary General, His Excellency Wamkele Mune, to thank the Great Lakes Policy Institute for the invitation to the Secretariat to participate in this very important dialogue on the future of Africa's industrialization. And as you have heard, my name is Silva Ojakol, and I'm excited to be part of this discussion on behalf of the AFCFTA Secretariat. We say that from this side, once you are serving the continent, you have no nationality, you become an African by nationality. But my village is Uganda for purposes of Africa. So you'll be probably happy to also know that I'm Ugandan and I have a passion for what is going on in the AFCFTA, but more importantly for what we think that all the member states of the African Union and Uganda also in particular could benefit from the AFCFTA. So apologies from the Secretary General. We have been running the Intra-Africa Trade Fair in Durban in South Africa for the past 2 weeks. And so he was on an overnight flight. He's actually in transit between Durban and Accra, Ghana. So he was not able to join you in this session. And he asked me to represent him in the session. We know that a couple of weeks ago, or 3 weeks ago, Uganda held an AFCFTA week, which was organized by the Ministry of Trade and Industry, Trade, Industry and Cooperatives, and the UNDP Resident Office in Kampala. And a lot was discussed during that session. But just for the purposes of the participants who may not have been part of that AFCFTA week, I would like to, first of all, put the agreement in context. The agreement, as it is today, has 4 components. The framework agreement, that is the overarching one, that gives the broad framework and the broad agenda of where we are going in terms of the continental integration, economic integration. And there are 3 protocols that are appendices or annexes to the framework agreement. The trade in goods, the protocol on trade in goods, protocol on trade in services, and the protocol on disputes, dispute settlement, or what is commonly called protocol on the rules and the procedures on the settlement of disputes. Because we know that when trade begins to happen, disputes will arise, and therefore we'll need a dispute settlement mechanism. Now, those 3 protocols have been concluded. However, there are a couple of residual issues that are still being negotiated in the protocols. One is on the rules of origin. The second one is on the tariff liberalization schedules. And then the third one, of course, is also on the offers under the protocol on trade in services. 2 more aspects that we are working on is the one on the special economic zones and what would happen to products that will be coming from the special economic zones, how they would be treated within the AFCFTA trading. And then the other rules that we are going to develop are the rules that will be governing infant industries, because ultimately that's where we would want to go. Now, the second phase of our negotiation is going to focus on investment, intellectual property, competition policy, digital trade, and women and the youth in trade. Now, coming to the focus of the issues that we are looking at in this dialogue, which is the future of Africa's industrialization, agenda beyond policy to action. I would like to outline the vision of the Secretariat in terms of the industrialization of Africa, using the platform of the African Continental Free Trade Area. The strategy that we are developing in the Secretariat is based on the Framework Agreement Article 3, which outlines the objectives of the agreement. So that article, in one of its objectives, it talks about industrial development through diversification and the development of regional value chains as a precursor for us to be able to get into the global value chain. It also talks about agricultural development and food security. So that is part of the Article 3. So as we all know, Africa's development has been a paradox from the standpoint that we are resource rich, but home to the world's largest, poorest community. We are always classified as the bottom billion. Now the bottom billion wish to rise up. And we think that the AFCFTA agreement, the agreement that establishes the African Continental Free Trade Area, gives us the opportunity to rise beyond what we are doing currently. And as I have outlined, the agreement has a very wide scope. It's not just a trade agreement. We look at it as a development instrument. And that is where the industrialization comes in. That is where the regional value chain development comes in. And that is where agricultural development comes in. So we look at it as a development instrument, an instrument that will then provide predictability in trade, predictability in investment, predictability in intellectual.
That we seem to have lost Silva Ojako. who is the Chief of Staff at the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat in Accra, Ghana. We're trying to get him back. I think he had started grounding us in Article 3 of the agreement that speaks about industrial development through diversification, also detailing about agriculture, development, and food security. He was also talking about the bottom billion, a continent which has resources, but still has very big challenges. And he was building his case. He's our keynote speaker today. So we'll try to see if we can get him back as soon as we can. Either he has bad network or something, but we'll try to get him back because he was still going on to build his keynote. I don't know, do we try to get him back or we can, or are you back? Silva, are you back? Okay, I don't think we have got him back yet. Let's see if we can get him back to conclude his keynote. But for the meantime, we are supposed to be going into our panel discussion to discuss his keynote, but also to discuss, among other issues around policy and how do we move from just talking to action. And I wanted to introduce my panelists today who will be discussing all this. Today we have Dr. Fred Muhumuza. Dr. Fred Muhumuza is a senior economist and senior lecturer at Makerere University. Dr. Fred, thank you so much for joining us. I would kindly request that you open your camera up so we can see you. Also, this afternoon, we are privileged to be having, Silva, you're back. It's good to have you back. I had started introducing my panel, so let me finish it, then I bring you back again. We will also be discussing, having a panel discussion with Daniel Njiwa, who is the head of Regional Food Trade and Resilience under the Policy and State Capability Division at the Alliance for Greener Revolution in Africa. I also have Boaz Keizire, who is the head of Policy and Advocacy at the Alliance for Greener Revolution in Africa. I also have Dr. Julius Kiza, who is a senior lecturer at Makerere University. Those will be discussing the Africa Development Agenda from just discussion to action. But let me give an opportunity to Silva to continue and finish his keynote address. You're welcome back, Silva. Please, you have the floor.
I think I will be very brief. I will not read the entire speech of the Secretary General. By the time I went off, I was talking about the opportunity that the FCFTA presents to the African continent as a turning point for the continent to move into the industrialization. And our strategy, as I say, is hinged on Article 3. We have now identified regional value chains that we need to focus on for the coming few years. And the value chains are agro-processing, and that would cut across a whole range of things that include dairy and dairy products, cotton, textile, and garments, and the food chain in terms of the rice, the corn, and so on. So the agro-processing is one of those. And I think for purposes of Uganda, the agro-processing is a critical element. It's a very strong point for us. A dairy products, a dairy line, livestock products in general is probably a very strong point for Uganda, but also the cocoa and cocoa value chain. And for our purposes, for Uganda,
that's what we are saying. Yes, that's all. Yes, we can remove. Yes. Can I add? We should also say in terms of.
So the second area of the of the value chains is the automotive sector. In the automotive sector, we know that there are a few countries in the continent that are strong in the automotive sector. It is South Africa, Morocco, Egypt, I think Algeria, for an extent, Kenya, and then there are the upcoming countries that are Ethiopia, of course, and then there are upcoming countries, Rwanda, Ghana, I think Uganda, in terms of the Kira Motors. But what is critical for companies like Kira Motors is to find a niche. Are we going for luxury cars? Are we going for the buses? Because that is critical. We need to select in the automotive sector, what is that area that we can excel in so that we can be able to log on to or be part of the automotive value chain in the African continent. The automotive sector promises to be very, very strong in the continent. It is a drive by the automotive, the big automobile manufacturers, Toyota, Ford, Nissan, VW. They are all part of the initiative and they are working together with the Secretariat in terms of the automotive sector. The other value chain, of course, is pharmaceuticals. And the reason is very clear. We know that the COVID exposed us because now global supply chains were disrupted. Countries started to say they cannot export to other countries, and therefore we're left at the mercy of nature, at the mercy of God, to take care of the health requirements of our continent. And therefore the pharmaceutical industry, pharmaceutical value chain is critical for Africa's development. For a healthy population will be a wealthy population. In terms of what are the prospects, the automotive sector promises something like a $70 billion industry. The pharmaceutical sector is a $30 billion industry. A textile and garment, I think, is about $50 billion industry, and so on. So these are the areas that we are looking at in terms of the regional value chains, transportation and logistics, based on the potential for import substitution and existing production capabilities on the continent. Now, for each of those value chains, we have considered a number of areas. What is the interconnectivity as between one country and another, so that each country is able to be part of the value chain for purposes of an all-round development, for purposes of ensuring that all of us are beneficiaries to the AFCFTA agreement. Now, if a country does not have an automotive industry, how can such a country be able to link to the automotive value chain? If a country is a producer of copper, looking at the wiring of an automobile, that means that country can use its copper resources to be able then to be part of the value chain of the automotive sector. So these are the things that the Secretariat is looking at in terms of the value chain for industrialization of Africa using the African Continental Free Trade Area. To say that when we use this approach, because the AFCFTA opens the market of Africa, unifies this market that has hitherto been fragmented. Now we bring these markets together. So for purposes of marketing, if you're producing in Uganda, provided you are meeting the rules of origin, your product would then be able to trade across the continent. So for purposes of our discussion, I think that Uganda needs to focus on the Great Lakes countries, need to focus on those areas where they have the competitive and the comparative advantage in terms of the industrialization. So distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, I will not labor so much about this, but only to say thank you very much for the opportunity. We are available. I'll be on the discussion forum until probably the end of this policy dialogue. Thank you very much. Over to you, Solomon.
Thank you very much. Silva, before you go, let me just ask you one question, Silva, if you're still with us. So we were supposed to start trading in January, and we're all super excited about that. Any pending few issues? I mean, you mentioned them at the beginning, but is it, once you finalize all these rules of origins and rules that govern the infant industries and the intellectual property, is that all, or have you received commitment and all the instruments from the different African countries so that we can just get this off the ground? And what has really slowed down the process? Because there's a farmer in Chirihura or in Kabale who wants to start trading immediately.
Okay, thank you very much. As participants will know, the trading was launched on the 1st of January 2021. Now, what is slowing down the process? It is two things. It is the tariff reduction schedules, which are not complete. We only have 44 tariff reduction offers. Now, out of the tariff reduction offers, not all of them are meeting the modalities that had been agreed by the heads of state. The modalities, according to the agreement, are 90%, which should come as zero liberalization by year 5 to year 10. Year 5 for developing countries like South Africa, Egypt. Year 10 for LDCs like Uganda. So now the 90% we have not yet reached there for a majority of the countries. And some of those countries are actually in the East African community. The East African Community Customs Union has not yet reached the 90% level in terms of their tariff offer. Now, the countries that have reached the 90% level are the CEMAC, which is Chad, Cameroon, Gabon, Central African Republic. Their offer is 100% compliant to the modalities that were. So 90%, 7%, which is an interim liberalization, which should be done by year 13 from the start of trading. And the 3%, which is exclusion, but that exclusion is subject to a review after 5 years. So what is delaying is the tariff offers, which have not yet met the 90%. That is one. The second one, why we have not, which has slowed down the things, is the rules of origin. We have not fully agreed to the rules of origin. We are currently at 87% agreement on the rules of origin. So there is a 3 percentage point difference that needs to be agreed. One of those discussions is on the textile, that chain, the cotton, textile, and garment. There are countries that are bringing fabric from outside the continent for them to do the textile, the bed sheet, the clothing, and so on. So they are saying they should be given a leeway to keep importing, from outside the continent in order to be able to add value. Then there are countries that are producing cotton going to yarn and to fabric, and they are saying, no, we should now revert to the continent. So that discussion is ongoing. The cotton, textile, and garment sector is controlling something like 10 or 12 percentage points in terms of the rules of origin. If we agreed on the textile and garment, we would actually move beyond 90%. Now, the automotive sector there is still about 1.2 percentage points to agree. And if we got the 1.2 percentage points, we could move to close to 90%. Now, that discussion is going to take place in January next year, hosted by the government of Egypt, for the ministers to be able to agree. So that is what is slowing down the things. But what we are saying from the Secretariat point of view, if we are talking about agro-processing as a value chain, and we do not free agricultural trade, then we cannot be able to add value to our agricultural product. So the first thing is for us to begin to take a phased approach towards the reduction of tariffs in agriculture, for us then to be able to move to the development of the value chains in the agro-processing industry.
Silva, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for making those clarifications, because we've been wondering what's really slowing down. Hopefully the customs union, the East Africa sorts everything out, so that you don't have to blame East Africa anymore, while other blocks are really fast tracking the process. Thank you, Silva Jaco. Thank you very much. Live for us from Accra, Ghana. Thank you for the keynote address. And we'll certainly be bringing you into our discussion as we continue. Thank you again. If you've just joined us, we're on the 4th Great Lakes Policy Roundtable, and we're discussing issues that affect us as a continent. This series is focusing on industrialization beyond just words and policies to action. We're trying to get to why aren't we moving? If we are moving at what pace? Someone is arguing that our socioeconomic development is on the trajectory, and yet our industrial base is still really small. Let me bring in my panelists to discuss this issue. Today we have Dr. Fred Muhumuza, who is a celebrated economist, senior economist, and also senior lecturer at Makerere University. Dr. Fred, if you could just open your camera a little bit. We have Daniel Njiwa, who is the head of Regional Food Trade and Resilience under the Policy and State Capability Division at the Alliance for Greener Revolution in Africa. Thank you for joining us. Daniel, if you could open up your camera as well. Boaz Keizire Blackie is the head of policy and advocacy at the Alliance for Greener Revolution in Africa. Blackie, thank you very much once again for joining us. And Dr. Julius Kiza, who is a senior lecturer at Makerere University, also speak to us. Doc, it's good to have you. And gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation today. For the people who are on the call, I'll give you an opportunity to speak back later so you can write a few notes down. I'll be opening this up after the panel discussion. Let me start with Dr. Fred Muhumuza. Dr. Fred, what is your assessment of the state of industrialization in Africa, especially following what Silva has as far as the Africa Continental Free Trade Area? He argues that we need to concentrate on developing the pharmaceutical industry. We need to concentrate on the textile and garments industry as well.
Have we lost Solomon?
You can, I would request Dr. Muhumuza to begin answering. I think you got the question as Solomon comes back.
I didn't get all the questions. I possibly got just a portion, but I can start on that so that I qualify to come again later after he has come back.
I think he's back. Solomon is back. Dr. Muhumuza, Solomon is back.
Dr. Muhumuza. Apologies, we had a small technical glitch. But yes, what is your assessment on Africa's industrialization agenda and where we are? You're welcome, Dr. Fred.
Yeah, thank you, Solomon. I think it's exactly what you have experienced. As long as we continue with these small glitches, we may call them glitches, but they can be very significant for an industrial manager. And I've really been with industrialists. The devil is always in the detail. This is not to advocate for the devil, but when the devil walks into the detail, for some of us who go all the way to the details, quite often we find devils there. And the devil can just be like the glitch you have had. You may call it a short technical disruption. You imagine if this was a power short shutdown, or even just a power fluctuation. Because for many of us who are just in offices, who are just lighting up our houses, power can even flicker and that's it. But for an industrial process, and I've met many in Uganda and in other countries' experiences, where you are on a complex industrial process and power flickers or goes off, that whole process is disrupted. It costs lots of money to get back to that process. Now, the few to avoid that have had to really put up 600 kVA generators that even after they have the grid power available, they cannot trust it. Now, that increases their cost of production. That increases or disrupts or informs their choice on where they have to invest. And this kind of conversation is very clear from where we are. We are discussing on the background of the Lagos Plan of Action, 1980, which had given itself 20 years, 2000. We have added another 20 years. This is 40 years. It's actually a generation. And we are not yet there. Now, what confidence do I have that the conversations which happened 40 years ago and we are here engaging them, will not be exactly the same story 40 years from now. I won't be there. Possibly I will be there close to 100 years, but I may not be able to influence things as they go on. So what is wrong with Africa? Is it policies? Is it actions? Is it the people? Is it the strategies? Or is it that we are still stuck in the industrialization agenda, looking for industries that were there in the 70s and 80s, which certainly are not going to be reconstructed today? If we want to talk about pharmaceutical, what should be our strategy? We certainly cannot jump policy to action. We need policies, but it matters what kind of policies we do. And the policies must not be looking directly and only at industrialization, because that can actually disrupt other environments one would need in order to proceed and be able to do the industrialization we are talking about. And I'll give a few examples. We have talked about pharmaceutical, and I've been following up this very, very closely since the entry of COVID. We all know how much it costs to just test one patient, or one person really. They don't have to be a patient. And we know how many millions are being tested per day across the world. We know what it means to produce a mask, and we know how many masks are being used across the world. If Africa was in this space before COVID, who knows how many billions we would have earned out of it all. Now, India, in their strategy, have decided not to invest in the research that produces vaccines, because that is complex. But they have decided to invest in the multiplication of those vaccines. And so when the formula for AstraZeneca is discovered in England, they will only have like 2 plants in Europe. The rest of the vaccines will be produced in India. And by the statistics I was able to see at the climax of COVID, India is producing 60% of the world's vaccines. Now that begins to speak to where is Africa's chance. It is not to say I am going to process my copper, I am going to process my oil, and Uganda, we know I've been out that conversation of an oil refinery. I am just going to begin studying and understanding the global value chains of industry and locate myself along those global value chains. Not to say I will scratch it from the ground and do it. Unless we change our thinking, we are still going to have problems. The pharmaceutical industry, we can actually do it by simply being part of the global value chains, because the R&D upstream is not there. Where did AstraZeneca come from? Universities. What is the state of our universities? Now that is another sector people will be telling you. That's education. But it's this education that is actually feeding down into industry. And Uganda has tried to adopt the program approach to say, don't just look at the letters of the alphabet EXY. You need the entire alphabet. Look at the letters you can pronounce well, depending on your culture and language, and focus on those. But make sure you're part of the alphabet. So I think our policies are not speaking to that broader scope and understanding of where the world is in the 21st century. And we're going to continue singing this song for the next 40 years, and we'll still be where we are. Sadly, these will be our grandchildren. Secondly, is the whole argument of supply-driven industrialization. What do I mean? All our policies will be clustered with what it will take to support an industry to exist from the upstream. Increase agricultural production, then set up industries, set up electricity supply for them, do good roads, standard gauge railways, airports. All of it is trying to say, support that industry to exist. Where is that industry going to put its produce? As long as Africa is littered with poor households, it cannot sustain industry. Industry are massive producers. You are going to be producing 10,000 bicycles per day. Where do you sell them? Even in Uganda, we are struggling to sell the little milk that we produce. Even have tried to get to Kenya, the markets are not there. So who is speaking on the demand side that is critical for sustaining industry? I don't see that conversation whenever discussions on industrialization in Africa comes into the question. And yet that is very critical. But we have borrowed massively and heavily to invest in the infrastructure allegedly to support industrialization. The discussion by the monitor And I can never forget your investigative journalism on who is stealing from the patients, which brought problems, but they were good problems. It highlighted the issues. Now there is this investigation on the mortgaging of Entebbe Airport. Yeah. Literally to set up factories and infrastructure that would support industrialization. We are borrowing to set up industrial parks. Now, in the process, the debt we have acquired has become a hindrance to growth of our own economy. That debt is costing households the benefits of services, which would enable them to increase their incomes and be able to support industry. So the heavy indebtedness of Africa, which we have put into infrastructure, can only support trade, which trade is originating from industries outside the African continent. The macroeconomics matter. That's my point. Don't look at one set of policies. Don't look at one set of the economy. Be mindful of what you do in the morning may come to haunt you in the evening, and eventually you'll have eaten your seed. And when people are coming out to sow and harvest, you are not part of that conversation. So I think Africa is where it is. In summary, because I don't see the political correctness, the ideological correctness, the policy correctness to do what it takes to industrialize, even at a small country level, regional level, and continental level. Until we resolve those software issues, the hardware is going to drag us down. Thank you very much.
Dr. Fred, thank you. That's quite an elaborate one. I was here just clapping on every point that we are mentioning, and you know, literally agreeing with you on all these issues that you are touching on. But I think what really touched me most is the supply-driven industrialization. I think for me stood out very strongly. Whilst we are thinking of, you know, growing our industrial base, but do we have market for this? And I think also what you touched on that that was deep was locating ourselves along the global value chain. You know, instead of having to say we are producing cars, can we just maybe produce maybe an engine and just locate ourselves there? Are we sure that we can sustain the whole, you know, car issue, or can we just concentrate on one? I mean, I can't agree more with you on some of the issues that you talked about. Access to stable power, you talked about it as a glitch, which was also interesting, but also borrowing. Where are we getting money that we are pumping into our infrastructure? I know that Entebbe Airport discussions are going on. The Chinese want to take over the cargo. The government is saying no, take over traffic. I know that there are conversations of taking over Lake Victoria. I know that the Chinese want to take over Port of Mombasa. They have already taken over the fishing rights in Somalia. It's crazy. Our borrowing to industrialize the country is one that is also questionable. So I agree with you entirely. Let me bring in Dr. Julius. Dr. Julius Kiza, give me your general assessment. Where are we at as a continent in terms of industrialization?
Thank you, Mr. Solomon Serwanja. Thank you, colleagues. My name is Julius Kiza. I'm a mwalimu. Mwalimu means teacher. And as a teacher, I want to begin by correcting the impression being created that the conversation on industrial policy and industrialization in Africa started in 1979. That is not true. The conversation on industrial policy has 3 distinctive phases in the history of Africa. Paul Tyambe Zeleza begins by documenting the pre-colonial history of industrialization. There was a debate of whether Africans actually got a diffusion of ideas from Western society and from Asia to be able to build industrial capabilities in the pre-colonial era. Paul Tyambe Zeleza, using archaeological research and historical analysis, concludes that actually Africans had built the capacity to build kilns, to build textiles using hardware. I mean, we're talking of resist dyeing of cloth, doing iron and metallurgy. And these things were happening in different parts of Africa, including Bunyoro Kitara, where we had Bunyoro Kitara Kingdom having skilled artisans supplying thousands of iron implements in the Great Lakes region. That was the pre-colonial phase. And Paul Tiambe Zeleza, A Modern Economic History of Africa, is a great source I would recommend to all of us. We have to liberate our mind. Industrialization does not come with foreigners to Africa. The second distinctive phase is the run-up to independence. The 1960s were declared the African Decade of Independence. That run-up was characterized in many African countries by the effort to build certain infrastructure. So when we discuss industrial policy today, there is that component of infrastructure, the hardware, which unlocks, which uproots the obstacles to the software of industrial policy. So we see in the case of Uganda, the establishment of the Owen Falls Dam and the building of roads and railways as part of that industrial policy under the regime of Governor Cohen. The third phase is the import substitution phase, which is associated with the first independence governments in Africa. Now, those distinctive phases are very critical in our conversation today. It is not true that African industrialization failed because of import substitution. The Asian success stories started with import substitution. The reason African industrialization failed is because we did not put in the efforts necessary to ensure that protection happened effectively, but also for a short period of time. We went to the Latin American story of protecting forever. And even then we were not selective. I'm mentioning these issues because they inform our current conversation on the drive for industrialization. So briefly, what is the state of industrialization in Africa today? I want to mention like 3 or 4 aspects of the state of industrialization. The first is the policy context. We have a tension between neoliberal trade orthodoxy as a context for industrialization in Africa. So the dominant conversation on trade and industrialization in Africa is revolving around the idea of liberalizing markets from WTO to the Africa-wide continental free trade agreements to country-specific situations like Uganda, Ghana, Rwanda, Burundi, etc. The conversation is that liberalize markets and create a context of neoliberal policies to be able to industrialize. I want to argue that that is a recipe for disaster. It is a recipe for failure. There's no single country that has ever attained industrial success measured by manufacturing value addition in the context of neoliberal policies. So the second variant, which contextualizes our industrial policy, is what we call strategic state guidance of wealth creation and industrial manufacturing. That is what is lacking in our continent and in our context-specific situations. The second key issue of industrialization is that we tend to focus on cosmetic value addition in African industrialization. Cosmetic value additions like cosmetics, which are used by the ladies. There is no woman who is ugly who becomes beautiful because of using cosmetics. What cosmetics do is to give someone a false sense of confidence that after all they look good. The point is, and I'm not insulting anybody, the point is that what we need for industrial manufacturing is deep value chains, deep transformation. The idea is that we have to shift from processing like agro-processing into activities that deliver structural value. And that leads me to the conversation on value chains. My friends, global value chains are political. Yes, they invoke the language of economics. They give the sense of confidence to us because we are taken to be part of the global value chains. I want to emphasize that your positionality, our positionality in the global value chain matters. There is a conversation which is traceable to Raoul Prebisch in the 1950s, but even much earlier to Alexander Hamilton, who published a report on the subject of manufacturers in the United States of America in 1791. All these sources are arguing that your terms of trade are in long-term decline if you remain producers of low value added products and importers of high value added products. How contemporary this message is. The idea is that we have to shift from cosmetic value adding activities and embark on activities that will raise us from the bottom to the middle and to the top of manufacturing value addition. The final element.
Fred, can you just give us an example of that? Sorry. Can you just give us an example of that, Doc? So that, yeah, an example of that.
Typical example. There is a highly connected political actor in Uganda who is given trade benefits and policy favors by the state because he processes coffee. I'll not mention the name. He could be on this platform. But why shouldn't I mention Brugasira? This is your friend, Solomon Serwanja. This gentleman is into coffee. Ideally, he says he's doing coffee manufacturing. All he's doing is cosmetic value addition. Now, using the same coffee, which he crushes and packets, using the same coffee, we can deepen the value chain and manufacture biofuels or manufacture artillery for the military. For manufacturing biofuels and artillery from coffee and from maize and from soybean and from related products would give us deepened value chains. That would be manufacturing. But what we are doing is processing. I'll give a second example. Uganda Bati imports ready-made manufactured sheets. All we do is to import capital goods to design the ready-made manufactured sheets and another machine to cut to shape so that the Solomon Serwanjas, the Kizas of this country can roof their housing. And with an imported stamp and imported ink, we label it Uganda Bati. The question becomes, what is Ugandan about Uganda Bati? Now, roofings has deepened value chains beyond Uganda Bati value chains. So roofings is on the track to deepen manufacturing and backward integration. That's what we need to do and push it even deeper. My point is that cosmetic value addition has never delivered economic transformation for any country. Africa will not be the first, Uganda cannot be the first, East African countries cannot be the first. The final element I wanted to mention is that there is a tension in Africa's industrialization space between industrializing by doing what other countries did, dirty manufacturing, dirty activities. So you produce industrial fumes, you dump things in the lake, you exploit labor. Now that view is in tension with the new conversation on smart industrial policy. The idea that we do not have to reproduce all the mistakes of the early industrializers. And that is driving us in the direction of saying, can we have climate smart industrial policies so that as we industrialize, we do not contaminate Lake Victoria or other freshwater sources, that we do not necessarily contaminate the airs. So there is that tension which calls for strict state regulation of factories to ensure that, yes, we create the wealth, we add manufacturing value, but we ensure that we do not destroy the environment because we are custodians of this planet for the future generations. I want to submit. Thank you.
Don't I just love you? I think I love you more.
Thank you, Solomon.
Dr. Julius Kiza. Thank you. Thank you so much. I was actually speaking about climate industries, smart industries. I was looking at the National Development Plan, and of course, they want to set up factories and industries in the different national parks. But in there, I don't see that aspect of climate and smart industries. Remember, these industries have been in places where we have, cut off, literally cut off forests and cleared swamps to establish them. So are we just, very hungry for industries, and we will get to a point where we are like China and then think of going back there? Or should we actually incorporate the climate issue in our industrialization agenda? I think that's very core for us. I think also for me, my take home from your submission is the cosmetic value addition. And I cannot overemphasize how you put it, that makeup makes you look good just briefly, and then you will wash it off, and then you'll be you. So I think that that also was very, very important. And then you talked about the positioning of Africa in the global value chain. And that's also very important, a very important point that I noted down. We will come back to this conversation. I'm super excited about hearing from intellectuals and what they have to say. So I'm really happy to be moderating this this talk. Let me bring in Boaz Kezire Blackie. Your thoughts on where we are as a continent, Blackie. You've just heard it from the philosophers, the people who are thinking for us as a country. Over to you, Boaz. What are your general thoughts and on the assessment of the state of industrialization on the continent, Boaz? You're welcome.
Thank you so much, Solomon. Thank you for having me on this panel. And I also greatly appreciate GLISS for inviting me to speak on this panel. When you listen from my colleague, Fred Mhumza, and as well as Kiza, you really get excited because I think they are bringing the real foundational messages that speak to what is actually challenging Africa in terms of industrialization. If you take a step back and look at the history of economic transformation globally, there is no country in the world that has transformed without founding its base in agriculture. Any economy, be it the United States, be it the Asian tigers, had gone back, if you go and read the history of their transformation, they are all based around agro-based industrialization. That's why we talk about economic transformation that is based on where the country's foundational issues are. When it comes to Africa, there is no doubt that we have to go back and reshape and reform our agricultural sectors to be able to trigger growth in the service sector, to trigger growth in the industrial sector. So that's my message number one. And in fact, just to reiterate what Julius Chiza was mentioning, if you again take the history of commitments that has been made across the continent, I happen to have read Kwame Nkrumah during the time of fighting for independence for Africa, the Renaissance periods. Kwame Nkrumah challenged his fellow leaders and said, there is no way we can actually drive independence if we are not planning around how we are going to drive economic change. And he said, agriculture and industrialization are going to be very central. We need to think alongside all this renaissance, getting independence and struggling with what to do with it. So leaders have actually consistently been very clear about what they needed to have. One success area that I think the continent has had on Africa is the commitment and recommitment. I know that's a frustrating success. How much do we eat commitments, But I think it is very important, Solomon, to appreciate that even if I think Kiza and Fred mentioned, you have a history of 20 years of leaders coming on the podium at the African Union Summit, ministers of agriculture, ministers of trade, recommitting. You still need that to continuously being in the minds of leaders to make sure that provide hope and commitments. I took some time to read through all various agricultural commitments that have been made. Most of them have actually been rehearsed. If you go back, you'll find that this actually not new, it has been made before. So for me, I want to just say, for the time being, let's take a step back and say, let's really appreciate the commitment that has been made. But let me move to the practical aspects. Why are we seeing success and why is that success happening in terms of driving agricultural industrialization? And I'll just give you one example, Ethiopia. In the design of their national development plan equivalent for Uganda, which is their growth and transformation plan, it's now the third growth and transformation plan, but at the design of the first growth and transformation plan, the leadership of that country made specific statements and they actually wrote it, and he himself was, the late Meles Zenawi, was very particularly concerned about when every paragraph, every sentence that was going into the national growth and transformation plan. A key statement that was there is that we are going to drive our agricultural transformation, our economic transformation, and it's going to be rooted in agriculture. So it was laid out at a planning level. So the point I'm making there is that planning matters. And I know every country has done the plan. But then the next challenge comes on how do you translate those plans into action? So we have now an Ethiopian, an integrated agro-industrial park that is rooted in the growth and transformation agenda. And this is one of the few examples where you have a combination of infrastructure development, both from railway, road, and also combined with the human resource capabilities, building the capability of the institutions and the state, as well as training, identifying young brains in different sectors, different understanding, take them to different universities, like name it, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, African universities, to make sure that you are developing a skill set purposely to bring them back to drive your industrialization agenda. A commitment from a head of state, a vision translated into an action plan, and a plan that does not just become a good plan that we all talk about, but taking it to action. And one of the things that defines success, and it's written everywhere, the role of the state. And in fact, the Prime Minister of Ethiopia at the time established a task force that regularly met 3 months to review the progress that was happening on the actions and the progress they were making, to make sure that all the promises are not just being written and left there. Even reading from the where countries have done well, be able to bring it back home. So today, when you look at a more growing and industrialization park integrated with the rail infrastructure, with the road infrastructure, with human resource capabilities that is happening in different parts of Ethiopia region, is based on that foundation. Strong leadership, commitment from planning, action, and taking it to another level. We have similar examples on the continent that relate to that, but they are still scattered. They are still scattered. And let me tell you, there is nowhere, and as I mentioned, if you look at the theory of transformation, if you look at the labor force today, the hugest number of population is still stuck in agriculture, but not actively involved. Young boys and women who are in the rural areas, when you are doing national accounting, they are all counted as part of people who live in rural areas and in agriculture. But they are not going to the farm. They are not actually riding a bicycle, taking a banana at the market, but they are counted. Our national accounts count them as part of agriculture. And yet in transformation, we are supposed to be seeing these guys getting new jobs in agro-processing, hammer mills and emerging towns. And that is not happening. A lot of population is still stuck in the rural areas, unemployed. Transformation is not happening. If we don't develop industries, all this will be a dream. And therefore, the commitments that I started excited about, without translating them into action, Africa will still have a very long way to drive its agro-industrialization agenda. The new progress that we are seeing, we need to scale them up. And when you scale them up, you can on evidence see this from an evidence of saying how many jobs are being created every year because a new SME or a new industry has been established. Are we doing that kind of daily accounting to ourselves that jobs are being created and they are being created as a result of new small and medium enterprise established? And then lastly, the power and the importance of the right policy and regulatory environment. It is easier said than done, but I think we have to look at the specific incentives that are created. Ethiopia recently established a policy to reduce, because initially they wanted to raise tax revenue from generating a lot of taxes and levies from importation of agricultural machinery and others. But through an economic analysis, they were able to reduce and actually remove all taxes and levies to the extent that all the importation of agricultural equipment is tax-free. And that has translated into a lot of creating more jobs in terms of agro-processing and things like those. So there are specific policy incentives that are very critical. Tax breaks, and I think these are all theoretically well-founded. Tax breaks, incentives for investment, and even encouraging local investments as part of the agriculture-based agro-industrialization. I think there are lots of examples that we can draw from the continent that can really give us an incentive to be able to commit to drive this particular part. And I think our colleague from the Africa Continental Free Trade Area mentioned a very strong point. And this is my last message on this. In 2014, when Africa heads of states were preparing to meet in Malabo, Equatorial Guinea, to renew their commitment on the Comprehensive Africa Agricultural Development Program, CADA, the famous Maputo commitment on agriculture, we did a study at the African Union to look at doubling agricultural trade on the continent as a precursor to drive intra-Africa trade, because intra-Africa trade was not enacted by then, 2014. Ministers of agriculture challenged us and said, we will not actually double agricultural trade. The potential is bigger than doubling. They made a decision, if you look at 2014 Malabo Declaration, is around tripling intra-Africa trade in agricultural products as a precursor or the proof of concept for Africa Continental Free Trade Area. When we do the tracking now today, we see we are far away, 5 years away from meeting the particular commitment. We are far away from meeting that commitment. The issues and the challenges, what Fred and Chiza were explaining. We need radical shifts and changes and leaders are central, are going to be very central in driving those radical changes. Over.
Interesting. Boaz, you make very critical conversations there, from the leadership, the planning, the implementation, and the issues around policy. While I was listening to you, I've been thinking, so why aren't we doing these things? Like, why? Like, why aren't we doing these things? We plan, we have, you gave an example of Ethiopia, which had a deliberate, structure to industrialize and to core itself on agriculture. And they've been doing well. Many of the countries have all these master plans, right? We have the National Development Plan. Ethiopia has what you've told us is the National Growth and Transformational Plan. Ghana has its own plan. What is that from planning to implementation? I thought you could I'll give you an extra 1 minute to speak to that. In some of these countries have even great policies that you're talking about, presenting a policy environment to push for industrialization. The plan is there, the policies are there, but there's a problem with the taking action on those plans and policies. Boaz.
A very difficult question, Solomon, but I would just attempt to do it this way. If you do a plan, you must have a combination of a very strong leader that's committed to that plan. You cannot divert from that plan. But more importantly, what we need to do differently is create instruments of accountability that we are all aligned to. And I think as a continent and many countries, we are lacking a scorecard, an instrument that challenges us. You remember, NEPA started with a peer review mechanism. It died. It was beginning to bring change. Leaders feel challenged when they get into a summit or a discussion and they are being shown how they are doing things so far away from where they should be, and when other countries are moving forward. It creates a backward effect. We need a very strong accountability mechanism, a scorecard that challenges us that if you don't do business differently, you already put it in the plan. But what we see on the continent is moving away from the plan to meet other objectives of why we take responsibility for some of these things. So I think it's very, very important that we discuss it square where that progress where it has been made, leaders have not only been able to do plans, take them through, challenge everybody that's behind this particular work, they have actually created instruments of accountability. The penalties of failing to account for a commitment that has been set is ruthless. Just go back to the Southern Asia tigers. That's how it happened. So business as usual, it's going to be frustrating today and more. We have to be more strong in terms of accountability. Penalties for accountability has to be more than what we are seeing. Just a plan is not good enough. It just only gives hopes and aspirations and exciting. And we get out of this meeting, just all of us excited about a good plan. Doesn't make sense if you don't account. How much did we actually meet based on what we agreed yesterday? If you're running 100 kilometers per hour and you are sweating, you are excited, and yet your target is 250 kilometers per hour, you're not doing anything. But you meet your colleagues on the way, you say, oh my God, I'm feeling good. Far away from your own target.
Listen, I can't agree more with you. People in good governance will come for you when the accountability systems come in, and rule of law and all those things will come in, where we've seen governments set up really strong accountability mechanisms. There have also been leaders have been described as dictators to some extent, where your approach has worked, but we'll come back to that. Thank you very much, Boaz. Really, I appreciate your submissions. Really, I really appreciate your submissions. Listen, let's listen in from Daniel Njiwa. Daniel, you've heard it from the gentleman. We want you to give us another context from through your lens. What is the situation analysis of Uganda's of Africa's industrialization? Where we are.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me? So
yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
Great. No, thanks a lot, Solomon, and the organizers for inviting me. Obviously, I got the invitation like a couple hours, maybe a day ago, which is not too bad, but I think it really raises a few questions in my head as to, often we get, smart brains, the Kizas of this world. I mean, listening to Silva, sharing experiences from the SCFTA, but I think sometimes there's a risk we may be talking to ourselves. We may be talking to just officials and just academicians and just, development practitioners, but not really the people that are supposed to be, changing the landscape, the policy makers and the implementers that need to be in the room. So I really hope that we have that caliber of people in the room and are listening to all of these intelligent suggestions that are coming through. I mean, after Silva, after Julius, and after Boaz have spoken, really, there's not much for me to say. I will try to really share a bit of my experience in this space. And because I'm coming from an agriculture background, I'll probably be, focusing more on the agriculture side. But I think before I go there, there are key principles or facts to industrialization. One is there has to be competitiveness. And the second one is an issue of demand and supply. So you just don't go into manufacturing cars when nobody is buying cars. You just don't go into manufacturing iron sheets when you don't possess the necessary comparative advantage to produce those items at a cheaper or more competitive level. So as Boaz indicated, most of these global, economic giants have had to start from somewhere. And we also need to look into ourselves as Africans and as a Uganda. Where do we have our comparative advantages? Where does Africa have, possess comparative advantages? And comparative advantages works with, resource endowments. Resource endowments in terms of, raw materials, in terms of weather, in terms of the climate, in terms of, the capacities, human capacity, the technology, access to information, the infrastructure, and all of that. So if you put all of that together, I think the question should be, are we ready to start competing with China in making cell phones? Maybe not now, maybe in the next 5 years. Are we ready to compete with, Germany in making, cars? Maybe this type of Mercedes not, but maybe the type of car that allows us to move, cassava from our fields, yes, maybe we can compete on that. So I think it goes back to all of that analytics to understand where do we have our competences, where do we have our, our comparative advantage, and where is our demand in our African market. And this perhaps takes me to the next point. There are a number of key trends that are happening in our world right now. And I think we need to pay attention to that, because all of this industrialization conversation is now about 5 decades old. And that's not funny, because we haven't really moved much. In fact, when you look at some statistics, some countries were, much better or deeply industrialized 20 years ago than they are today. It all goes back to whether that industrialization made economic sense or not. So we're looking at trends now. We're looking at population levels growing. Africa is really at the top of this. Population pressure growing at 3% per annum. We're looking at other trends around urbanization, people moving from rural areas to urban centers, and Africa is also on the top of that. I think about 3% per annum. So at the end of the next decade, we're looking at Africa probably having close to the top of the biggest population in the world in terms of regional blocks. And we're looking at our city centers, the Lagoses of this world, the Dar es Salaams, the Kampalas of this world, the Nairobis, really, really highly populated. And the question must be, where are we going? What are they going to be demanding, these people? What are they eating today? What are they buying today? And what will they be buying if they move, from the rural areas to the urban areas? So if we answer those questions, already the Africa Continental Free Trade Area is estimating that as Africa, we're importing about 50 billion worth of food. And this is estimated to triple in the next decade or so to 100 to 150 billion. And that's an opportunity for us. It is a question that we need to be answering to say, if this is the demand, currently based on the resources that we have, based on what people can afford. What is our government doing? What is our private sector doing in order to prepare for this new wave of demand for food? And what type of food is this? And we need to analyze all of that, because incomes are also slightly increasing. People are demanding, certain types of food. There's, talk around dietary diversification, and we need to be planning and preparing for that. Because at the end of the day, if we don't do that, we end up really at the end of, the importation from global markets into Africa for to our people. So if you ask me about the landscape around industrialization, for me is pick your battles, pick your wars, look at what you have, and then, plan around it. For now, I see an opportunity, massive opportunity around food. And food is going to be a big one today, is going to be a big one in the next decade. So let's look at what needs to happen in order to us to have, to reduce the imports of food that we're bringing in, the rice that is coming in massively in West Africa and probably in East Africa. We're even importing wheat, we're importing maize, we're importing oilseeds, we're importing feed for animals. What do we need to do as a people, as Africans, to invest and prepare for those waves? As people grow, incomes grow, and they're looking to demand more meat, more processed food. What have we invested enough in producing meat, the right quality meat, the processing of meat, and other related products? So I think we are on the right track. We're not doing much, but as Boaz indicated, this is an issue that starts from policy to action. And for me, the private sector are investing in the right spaces. The public sector are investing in the right spaces. We need this electricity, we need the energy, we need the infrastructure. How do we move our food from rural areas, remote areas, to where it is needed in the markets, in the city centers, where this consumption is happening, and then we plug in. As a practitioner and somebody working in regional food trade, we are testing a few examples, and we're working in East Africa, in Uganda, in Tanzania, in Kenya, Rwanda, and also in Southern Africa and Western Africa. And what we have done to start off, and this is a point I want to drive to everybody else, start small, start with things that work. So we are looking at what are these value chains that we find competitive, that Kenya is looking to buy, and Uganda is able to produce competitively. And what are the blockages along that supply chain from Uganda to Kenya, from Malawi to Rwanda? And we've picked soybeans, we've picked maize, we've picked other things. But I think what is interesting in this is the analytics that go into just understanding that single or individual value chain or supply chain, in terms of the gaps, in terms of who is doing what, and then start to address those things. It's going to be a baby steps kind of approach. We can't get to do everything at one point, but let's identify where these opportunities lie, and then one by one, resolve those gaps and allow processing to happen, allow value addition to happen, allow that this product ends up to the fork or ends up to the table where it is most required. I think I'll stop there for now. Thank you so much.
Listen, Dan, I can't agree more with you, especially on the issue of concentrating on what we do best. Can we compete with, with Germany to produce cars, or can we compete, with the US in maybe tech, or China in tech? But can we have a competitive advantage in agriculture production and concentrate there and grow our agro-processing better, because we have a competitiveness there? And one of the previous speakers was talking about having a competitive edge and concentrating where we can work better. And I think that was someone from I think it was Silva from the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, who was speaking about, can we concentrate where we have a competitive and comparative advantage? And Daniel is pushing that we should concentrate on growing our agro-processing better, because there we have a competitiveness, and we should start from where we are. So thank you, Daniel. Njiwa, thank you so much for that. But just going back to what Blanc was saying about there must be a deliberate effort by the people in the leadership to actually push the agenda of industrialization, which brings me to the point do we have a political will in our different countries to actually push the industrialization agenda? I mean, here in Uganda, we have issues. Different investors who want to set up factories, for example, have complained about getting bribes, you know. They have complained about getting bribes in this, when they want to, for example, get something. We've had corruption-related allegations against people in power, you know, and someone will decide, if you want a bribe, I'm coming to invest into your economy. You want a bribe, I'm just taking my money out of the economy. And that means you have lost an industry and you have actually lost jobs and, you know, other incentives that would have come. So let's talk about the political will here. On paper, it looks it was there. I mean, from way back in 1980, African leaders came together at the Lagos Plan of Action and decided, you know what, we're going to follow this. Right now, do we have political leadership that is willing to push for the industrialization agenda by putting in place what Black was saying, consequences to failing to meeting some targets? Right. So I want to bring in Dr. Fred Muhumuza. I just wanted you, Dr. Fred, to speak about that in terms of the political commitment to industrialize Africa. Dr. Fred.
Thank you so much, Solomon. And I think I really want to go back to agreement with Professor Kiza. The reason I had set at 1980 is because we are really discussing a Lagos Action Plan, which was there. But he made it even worse to say we were there even before. And this relates to the political commitment you are saying, because at that point, the kings running kingdoms were literally committed. And that is why whatever Professor Kiza mentioned was happening. Now, so politics does matter. Besides the roads, besides the infrastructure, besides the electricity, besides writing nice policies, politics is never written in books, but it is out there and is very significant. And as I said, that is the software, which is still questionable in Africa. Are the African politicians committed? My friend Blackie has said, the ministers even said, no, doubling is not good enough. Let's triple. It's a statement. Go ahead and do it. But none of them is ready to do that. They are already working on the means of how do we retain political power? How do we retain political military dominance in these spaces? We are so armed that you can even imagine Africa is going to war. And I liked a conversation the other day that Uganda, for all its history, has never been invaded by any foreign country. You can talk of Tanzania. Tanzania, it is us who invaded it first. It came in self-defense, and the Ugandans who were there said, oh, why don't you actually go and chase them back so that we can come back? But look at how much we have spent on military equipment. Today, security, and for all the right reasons, really, because you don't want to be like Somalia, you don't want to be like where Ethiopia is going, but who is fighting who in Ethiopia? And it's going to happen at the very pace that Ethiopia had set for its progress. This war is really going to set them back possibly a century, not even a decade. And this is politics. The war in Ethiopia is not about anything else, it's about politics. So is our politics committed? Still in the space of politics, Professor Kiza has said global value chains are political. Exactly. And until you understand that politics, you are going to remain with cosmetic industrialization. That is if even you are allowed to do that. Because cosmetic is also good enough. As you say, the woman may put on cosmetics and then wash it off. But for the period that cosmetic was on her face, she got what she wanted. She might have grabbed a very handsome rich man in that process, and the marriage starts from there. So cosmetic is not the problem. It is a strategy. Even the Kiprotich and one of our fellows have just broken the world record. That guy began crawling. That guy walked. That guy ran. So being cosmetic, as long as you don't lose the big picture, is a good way to start. And sometimes you can even end there. It might be so big. Because for me, I always say to get a small pie of a big cake is something nice. Let's join together with the rest of the world, bring down this elephant. Now, even if they give me 2% of the elephant, it's already 100 kilograms. This is how our forefathers survived. Hunting hippos, which are 6 tons, the whole village is feasting. But you go alone, the best you'll get is a squirrel. Your family is starving. So we need to be very, very strategic. Understand the global and local politics. Unless you understand the global politics, you are not even going to be allowed in those spaces. Industry in Africa is not going to pass if we are trying to fight the political establishments of today. That's why India has decided, fine, you guys, I'm entering the pharmaceutical industry. I will manufacture your vaccines. You do the high science, get your patents, give me the space of manufacturing. And they are doing 60% of the vaccines. You can estimate how much money they have earned out of the COVID story alone. Where is our Professor Gwang going to go with his COVIDex? You think it is lack of science? There is so much science. When I look at Uganda's success and survival on COVID, who knows, COVIDex must have played a role, but no global political power will allow you to recognize that, even to push it into the system. Now, understanding those dynamics, you begin to say, where am I going to fit in? I will end for me with my famous kind of statement to illustrate my point. You have been in Kampala and you have seen these young boys who have skating shoes. All he needs to invest in is skating shoes. They cost 40,000. Then he will time a taxi or a truck or a whichever car and hang on to its wheels, and he will be dragged for kilometers and will be home as fast as that car gets there. You and me have invested 600 million in that car. This young man invested 40,000 in his shoes. He's getting at home at the very same pace. And by the way, when traffic jags you down, for him, he hangs onto another car. He keeps going. So how do we understand the political dynamics, the structural dynamics, before we think we are going to industrialize the way Hong Kong did it, the way Singapore did it? We have to face the realities. These realities are not about to change. And until we continue singing the song of the 70s, the song of the 60s, we are going to lose it. Blackie was right. Our agriculture is a beginning point. Do we have a strategy to get beyond? Because even our forefathers who went to the US began in cotton farms. The prairies we read about Canada was agriculture. But they had a strategy that 100 years from that time, they will be into the IT. We can leapfrog. But don't think you're going to leapfrog into conveyor belts that are assembling buses, conveyor belts that are assembling bicycles, for heaven's sake. We need to think different. Thank you.
Thank you. Interesting. Thank you very much. I see a couple of hands there, but I will I'll open up the floor in the next 10 minutes to our audience. I thought I would bring in Dr. Kiza here. Dr. Fred, thank you very much for those submissions. Dr. Kiza said cosmetic investments is just short-lived, and you're saying we could start there. But Dr. Kiza, let's come home. From what I'm hearing from everyone here is that Africa needs to concentrate in its competitive advantage, where it has competitive advantage and comparative advantage. And we all agree with the people on the call that agriculture seems to be the center stage. Whilst Silva said that we should also go into the pharmaceuticals and the automobile industry, we all agree on this call that agriculture should be the center of our starting point to grow our agro-processing so that we can even export more in a more better manner. This brings me to access to finance. Yes, we have all these dreams, but who is going to set up these factories? Are government policies aligned to finance and support industrialization, the industrialization agenda, access to finance, and you know, how do we attract investors to invest into the agriculture sector that we all say, but largely into the entire industrialization of Africa? Let's talk about the financial bits to it. Dr. Kiza, do you want to come in on that?
Thank you very much, Solomon. Thank you very much, colleagues. As an elder, I'm one of the elders in this country. I'm on the 5th floor of life. So as an elder, I didn't want to talk too much. But since Serwanja has invited me, I will express my few viewpoints and then close my big mouth. On this question of comparative versus competitive advantage, I want to be abundantly clear. when we talk of comparative advantage, we are referring to God-given endowments, God-given capabilities, good climate, fertile soils, good weather, so the God-given issues, rather than what we have done. When we talk of comparative advantage, we are amplifying the Garden of Eden status that we inherited from our forefathers and grandmothers. The real problem with comparative advantage as a basis for governing a 21st century economy is that it is inappropriate for a competitive global political economy. It is inappropriate to base your future, the future of your growing population, on what God gave you and what God gave you alone. Let me be clear. It is true that comparative advantage is the beginning point, but I want to argue that it is the basis of economic transformation, not the means of economic transformation. That means that whereas we can emphasize the importance of agriculture, we need to understand, and I want to put this in Swahili, siri ya maendeleo ni utengenezaji, si ukulima. And I wanted to provoke Solomon to translate this for us. Siri ya maendeleo ni utengenezaji, si ukulima. Meaning that the secret to development lies in industrial transformation, not agriculture. I want to quickly add that there is no efficient agricultural sector anywhere in the world, with the possible exception of Israel. All agricultural sectors are subsidized by the state. What does it mean? I know countries that have viable industrial sectors, competitive industrial sectors. I'm not aware, with the possible exception of Israel, I'm not aware of an agricultural sector that is efficient anywhere in the world. And that speaks volumes. What it means is that for us to address the question of food security sustainably, for us to address the question of the fundamentals we must grow, industrial raw materials grown on our farms, we have to link it with industrialization. It is industry that produces fertilizers. It is industry that manufactures the machines. It is industry that actually creates labor for the surplus population in the rural area. That means when we industrialize, we actually create space for agricultural productivity enhancement on the land. Without industrialization, my friends who say we are farmers, we are agriculturists, we are what? My friends, don't overemphasize the importance of agriculture in the 21st economy. We need fewer people in agriculture. We need to liberate our people. Siri ya maendeleo ni utengenezaji, si ukulima. I want to quickly add what sounds abusive. Nimetoshwa na sauti za washamba. Natamani sauti za viongozi bora, sauti za maendeleo, sauti za utengenezaji. I'm saying that I'm really tired of this conversation. The conversation on the peasantry is not helpful for the 21st century. We need to engage very, very actively with a conversation on how to transform our economies. Now, can I address what you mentioned? The need for agriculture sector financing. Agriculture sector financing can come from different sources. Most of our farmers use owner savings, what you save as an individual farmer. When you get strained, you go to a relative. Those are the main sources documented. UPRC did a study, and the main sources of credit for our farmers, in fact, most of our people in this country, it is your own savings, which are very minimal, or your relative. So if I am broke, I go to Dr. Muhumuza because he has brains and has networks, he lends me money, or Solomon Serwanja. But that has constraints. Beyond that, what we are doing is to go to microfinance. We have been fooled to believe that microfinance can be a source of salvation for our economy. Microfinance delivers micro-developmental outcomes. We need to transition. Our ancestors had built a cooperative bank to address the unique interests of our farmers. We killed the cooperative bank. It was a Canadian consultant who advised our political elites to kill the Uganda Cooperative Bank and to kill the cooperative movement. Now, the other useful alternatives would be to go into development banking. Why development banking for farming, for industry? Is because you need big monies, big investments with a grace period that permits you to do farming and be able to produce, sell, earn an income, and pay back using friendly terms of borrowing. What we have done is to pretend that we love agriculture, but we have sacrificed it on the altar of microfinance and on the altar of family savings and on the altar of relatives. There is no country that is governed that way. If there is any policymaker here listening, please listen to our frustration. We are speaking as citizens, but also as academics. We have erred and erred fundamentally. Finally, can I address the question you had mentioned, which is the political, do we have the political commitment to promote industrialization? I want to argue that the political wish to industrialize is abundant. What is lacking is the political will. The wish, I wish I had industrialized. I wish we were rich. We wish we are a middle income country. We wish by 2063, we have transformed Africa. That wish is abundant. What is lacking is the political will to translate the wish into concrete deliverables. And that has a lot to do with the kinds of people we recruit into public office. We recruit people on the basis of who knows whom, not on the basis of who knows what. We recruit relatives. Most of the elites in office, and I'm not saying all of them, most of the elites in public office have brains that are unwilling. They are unwilling to think outside the box. They are unwilling to grapple with the challenges of governing a modern economy. They are unwilling to transform our economies. The brains are unwilling. The political context is restraining. So we keep on moving in circles. We are not transforming our economies. We have not invested in picking the best and brightest and most competent to fill our offices. That is gap number one. Number two is the absence of institutions that are capable of serving and delivering. I'll give an example. The Ministry of Trade and Industry has a committee which is in charge of trade policy, and that's an important achievement. But what we have forgotten is that trade is war. Industrialization is war. And therefore, to approach trade as war is to say we need a high-level command and control center to coordinate our industrial policy for the benefit of our country, for the benefit of our region, for the benefit of our continent. We lack that strategic command and control center to coordinate, and we underfund our trade diplomats. What happens is that donors predominantly give us money to go and fight them. We say the trade is war. Biashara ni vita. So if you're going for war and your enemy pays your trips, pays your per diem, pays your laptops, you have lost the war even before the battle starts. That is what is happening to Africa. But the final problem we are confronted with, and I'm pulling our representatives at the African Union and the Africa-wide Free Trade Area Secretariat, we have populated our offices with elites whose ideological commitment is economic liberalism. Now, economic liberalism is not a wrong ideology. It is just inappropriate for Africa at the current stage of development. Now, these neoliberal economists have made a huge mistake. They are speaking the language of advanced countries. They have copied and pasted the language of World Trade Organization into the Africa-wide Continental Free Trade Agreement. For instance, they are talking of national treatment of foreign capital, meaning that when foreign capital comes to our countries and our regions, we should give them the benefits we give to our own domestic actors, our own citizens. They are talking of a language of non-discrimination. They are saying don't discriminate between your citizens and foreign companies and foreigners. Treat foreigners actually equivalent to the way you treat your nationals, or even better. This is foolishness of the highest order. We have copied and pasted the language of WTO into the African trade diplomacy conversation. We have signed a contract with failure. And I want anybody here to prove me wrong. How do you promote industrial transformation? By adopting trade-led industrialization in a context where the trade agenda is shaped by the people you are setting up to fight in the economic space. I want to submit, Chair, we are not doing the right thing and we have to wake up. In our generation, I hope we fix things. I hope we are not planning to announce in 2063 that we have had now the 7th decade of industrial development in Africa and it has never worked. I hope we do the right thing now instead of simply talking. Thank you, Chair. I submit.
Dr. Julius Kiza, candid conversation there, speaking tough on African leaders and also what we're doing as people. Wow, thank you. A couple of hands are up and a number of people really appreciating some of the views that you have put. I have Joy Kanali who is saying very great insight from Dr. Kiza there. I have Vanguard News Uganda that has said beautiful submission by Dr. Kiza. Henry Otafire, Dr. Kiza, powerful diagnosis of Africa's problem. Toby Muzora sending you some love and claps, saying thank you very much. Daniel Aboye saying very candid submission, Dr. Kiza, thank you. Zanecheri Onyango literally saying thank you so much, Dr. Kiza, for your submissions. And a number of comments have been coming through the chat sections, but I thought I could read those a little bit later. A number of hands have been coming up. So I want to open the floor to the people who have been listening to talk back for the next 30 minutes. And then I'll give an opportunity to my panelists to come back and wrap it up. Then I will invite Goba to come and close the session. All right, let me start with Maria Alessi. Maria Alessi, welcome. Please make your submission and comment. Maria, you're very welcome. Please, you have the floor, Maria.
Thank you very much, Solomon. Let me know if you can hear me.
We can hear you loud and clear. We can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear. We can hear you loud and clear, Maria.
Perfect. So I'm just going to start by appreciating all the panelists for making their very eloquent and quite well-informed submissions to this conversation. I'm always impressed by the fact that we're able to see how the structure and the system excludes, and especially because someone talked about the politics of economics, which will inform ultimately how industrialization will happen. And just to build on that point around really understanding how structures and systems exclude Africans because of the global power dynamics and the things that happen, I just want to raise a concern about us having conversations like this and continuously and intentionally excluding the voices of women from such conversations. It's highly embarrassing that as we talk about creating a new Africa, a better Africa, but also understanding that one of the key pillars for the industrialization is agriculture, noting that women are the biggest percentage of labor within that sector and will also be great contributors to the industrialization process. It would only be prudent that the organizers of conversations like this on public policy actually take time off to ensure that women are part of these conversations, and not simply because we're women, but because they are experts on these topics who are actually women. My last submission will also be specifically to the panelists. I think it's also prudent that as experts, but also people with access to information, that you make the time out to understand why exclusion happens, and so that the next time you're called to a panel, you make time to ask who else is going to be on a panel so that you don't embarrass yourselves by simply just sitting as men and having a collective conversation. Thank you very much, Solomon.
Maria Alessi there. Thank you for your submission. And this has been noted. And issues of including women in the agenda and the conversations are well noted. Maria, thank you very much for raising those. We will work back end and then we will do better next time. I am sure there were some efforts that were done to reach out to some women panelists, but we were let down at the last hour. But yeah, we appreciate you, Maria. Thank you for raising the issue of having a gender balanced panel and for not excluding the women voices in this conversation. Maria, thank you very much for that comment. We appreciate you. Let's bring in David Sepuya here. David, you have the floor now. Please make your submissions and comments.
Okay. Thank you, Solomon. My name is David Sepuya. I'm the author of a book called Africa's Industrialization and Prosperity. I just want to make 2 points. One could go directly to the gentleman in Ghana about the possibility. Have we thought about this? Taking advantage of the petrochemical industry. All of Africa has the basic ingredients for petrochemicals, which is oil and gas. And the fact is that 90% of manufactured goods are derived from petrochemicals or have an input of petrochemicals. Whether it's the glasses I'm wearing or the laptop I'm using or the phone or the car you are going to drive, whatever, 90%. So there are great possibilities. We have lots of gas on the eastern border of Africa. We have lots of oil, Uganda, Kenya, Angola, all these nations. There is a great possibility there. As long as we continue to export our oil as it is, then we are missing out on a major manufacturing opportunity. I discussed that in the book. Then the second point I want to make, especially to the academics, is how do we do a linkage between manufacturing and education and training? Let me use 2 examples. In Germany, which is one of the greatest manufacturers in the world, the industry has a direct relationship with manufacturing or with education. So they have polytechnics. Industry will tell educators what kind of training they need. Now for us, as long as we continue with academic education, then we'll not be able to set the base for manufacturing in terms in as far as the preparation training of human capital is concerned. And another related one is China, the world's greatest manufacturer today. Over the last so many dozen years or 2 dozen years, China has shut down 500 universities and has converted them into polytechnics to prepare people for the manufacturing sector. I think these are things we need to also think about, particularly if we are to prepare. Right now, China is letting go of certain manufacturing. If Africa is to lift its manufacturing capacity, those are the opportunities we need to take up. In what's happening right now is that nations like Vietnam and India are taking up those opportunities because Africa, we are not prepared. That's my submission. I discussed that in that book, Africa's Industrialization and Prosperity. Thank you very much.
David Sepuya, thank you very much for your submissions. China shutting down universities and turning them into polytechnics, as well as focusing on growing our petroleum industry and the linkage between universities and manufacturing. Those were his 3 major points. Thank you very much for raising those. More hands are up. I thought I could bring in Noel Nshio. Noel Nshio, where you at? I'm going to look out for you. Noel, are you there? Okay. Noel Nshio, are you there? All right. I think we can't seem to get through to her. Let me bring in Jonas. Jonas, you have the floor. Jonas Atigudi.
Yes.
Yes, you're welcome, sir.
Thank you very much, Solomon. My name is Jonas Atingdi, and I'm calling from Ghana. I'm with the Kwame Nkrumah Ideological Institute based here in Ghana. My question is basically concerning the free trade agreement. I am wondering why we are not making a distinction between companies that have their headquarters outside of Africa and those that are headquartered here on the continent. Why should indigenous companies And I'm going to use the example of the automotive industry. We have a number of indigenous companies in Africa that are trying to enter the automotive market. And they need the push of their respective governments. But instead of their governments giving them the push, they are rather opening the doors for foreign companies to come and compete with them. And so in Ghana, for example, we have our indigenous company that assembles vehicles. As soon as the free trade agreement was signed and opened up, we had interest coming from Toyota, VW, Nissan, Hyundai. All of them now want to enter and establish assemblies and manufacturing of certain parts. Now, of course, they're going to use Ghana as a stepping stone to sell their products within Africa and also the Middle East. And so my fear is, if we are not careful, we might be thinking that we are building wealth through this free trade, but we are basically just transferring wealth to foreign companies. On paper, our GDP is growing, but the owners of that GDP will not be Africans. And so why are we not distinguishing between companies that are headquartered in Africa from those that are not headquartered in Africa? That's my first question. My second question has to do with a single currency. If we are going to increase intra-Africa trade, there is a need for us to have a stable single currency that will promote that trade. The 34 currencies currently in place are very unstable, and I doubt that they will do much in promoting trade. Thank you.
Thank you, Johnny. Thank you very much for your submissions. I can see Silva Ojakol from the Africa Continental Free Trade Area raising his hand already. I'll give him the last word. This, and Priscilla too has had a very interesting chat here. She has written that it would have been great to hear environmental concerns underpinning economic transformation and industrialization in Africa too. Critical because success on these will only depend on how well we will take care of our natural resources, which are the raw materials that we need to progress on both fronts. Priscilla Nyandoi, thank you very much for that comment. And yeah, Amon Bagarukayo says that exactly, Mr. Sepuya. It is true, in Africa we have resource gap. Most of the resources we claim to be ours have been already given out to foreign powers. For example, in Uganda, China has taken almost all the prospective licenses for earth minerals, I think. All right, more of your comments. Let me bring in Silva Ojakol from the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. Mr. Silva, you have the floor. You can as well answer Johnny's issues that he has raised. You're welcome, Silva.
All right, thank you very much, Solomon. First of all, I want to address the issue that was raised by Professor David Kiza on the cut and paste from the WTO and in respect to the MFN and the national treatment. Now, in trade policy formulation, you cannot run away from national treatment. You cannot run away from MFN. The reason being, if you're going to send our companies, for argument's sake, let me say the Mulwana group of companies or the Mukwano group of companies, if they are going to invest in the DRC or in Tanzania, and they are not going to be accorded national treatment, or even in terms of trade, the products that Mukwano group of companies or Mulwana group of companies are producing are not going to receive national treatment in the DRC, that means that already you are putting barriers to the trade. That's why the national treatment is in the agreement. And that is also why the MFN is in the agreement. The national treatment is not about products coming from outside or even companies coming from outside. It's about products that are made in Africa by African companies or African-based companies, provided they meet the rules of origin criteria. So there are provisions all through the agreement, and you'll find the rules of origin is one of them. You meet the rules of origin. Now, for products such as fisheries, for example, you know, we have the island state, Mauritius, Seychelles, Comoros, Cabo Verde, and so on. Now, there are fishing vessels that are fishing in the exclusive economic zones of these countries. And we've been asking, would the fish meet the rules of origin criteria? Because they are foreign vessels, they are flying foreign flags, and a majority of the crew, if not 100%, are foreigners. So we have been saying, no, instead of you having that, we're working on rules of origin on the fishery. So the national treatment is not about foreign companies. The national treatment is about companies whose roots are in Africa, registered in Africa, operating in Africa, provided their products meet the rules of origin. So I think that might clear the air. And you'll find this MFN national treatment principles are there in the WTO, they are there in the East African Community, in the COMESA, in SADC regional integration arrangement. So it is a principle that cuts across trade. To mean if my product crosses the border to another country, it should enjoy the same treatment as if the product is being produced in that country, provided the product meets the rules of origin. So I think that one clarifies the issue that was raised by Professor Dr. Kiza. Now, the other one is by David on the petrochemical industry. And I think Dr. Muhumuza raised this. Industrialization is not a one track. It's not a narrow thing. You are looking at the broader ecosystem of industrialization. If you are going into the automotive sector, I was told by the engineers that there are 30,000 parts in an average motor vehicle, 30,000 parts. Now, of the 30,000 parts, you know, today when you open the bonnet of your car, you see hose pipes, you see different kinds of parts. Now, those parts are made of, some of those parts are made of plastic, hardened plastics, suitable for the purpose. Now, the petrochemical industry definitely is part of that ecosystem of the automotive sector. Now, it is up to the countries to look at and say, here is an automotive sector that is going to grow. It will require tires. What is the raw material that you need to get the tires in place? Of course, you need rubber, you need some petrochemical product, you need this. So thinking outside the box means then that if the automotive industry, or when the automotive industry grows in the continent, I must then be able to be prepared to supply the tires. So I grow now my petrochemical industry. It doesn't have to be part of the track of maybe what we are focusing on. But then you are saying that if you have a growing automotive sector, it has linkages to many other sectors. It has linkages to the mineral sector in terms of the copper, in terms of the iron, in terms of the cobalt, in terms of petrochemical products, in terms of, so it's a whole broad, it's an ecosystem that then countries need to say, if South Africa is producing the motor vehicles, it needs tires, it needs copper wire to be able to wire the car and so on. And so countries must then be able to, so we cannot talk about metallurgy, we cannot talk about at the same time, but when you look at what the ecosystem of the automotive sector is going to look at, is going to involve, then countries must then begin to pick up from there and say, I am going to take on the wiring, I'm going to take on the tires, I'm going to take on the rims, which will need alloys, aluminium and maybe iron and copper and iron and so on and so forth. So that is the pharmaceuticals similarly. because the pharmaceutical industry, and Dr. Muhumuza mentioned Professor Gwang and the COVIDex. Now, you have a whole set of hubs that are going into the pharmaceutical sector. So if you say we're going to develop the pharmaceutical sector, that means that there are other things that you have to look at. What is the environment of the pharmaceutical sector that must be developed? It is the hubs, it is the, the research that goes into it. It is the isolating the molecule that you need from the laboratory. It is then producing some of the synthetic parts that you need in the pharmaceutical sector. So when you look at, when you talk about a value chain, you don't have to mention everything. The analyst would then look at and say, this is where I need to go in order to be able to support that value chain, or to take advantage or an opportunity that is being provided by the value chain. Now, to my brother from Ghana, on preference given to the foreign companies as opposed to the local companies. Now, I would like to give an example. Today, you see Airbus is producing aeroplanes, Boeing is producing aeroplanes. Airbus is the name of the company, is based in France, in Toulouse. But the parts that go into that Airbus A330-800 Neo, which Uganda Airlines now has, I think Rwanda Air, Ethiopian, and so on, is made from different parts of the world. The engine, the Rolls-Royce engine, is made from the UK. Some of the parts are made from Brazil. Some of the parts are made from China. The computer things, I think, are originating from Singapore, but they all go into making the Airbus A330, or whichever the model, A380, and so on. Now, in terms of your question as to the preference for foreign companies opposed to the local, the world is regionalized, but the world is more globalized now than it is regionalized. The companies that are moving into Ghana in terms of the assembly are Toyota. By the way, Toyota is beginning to assemble in Tema. Now, which is the parent firm that is chaperoning or babysitting, if you like, Toyota Ghana? It is Toyota South Africa. Toyota South Africa is the one that is babysitting Toyota Ghana. VW South Africa is the one that is babysitting VW Ghana. So now the key thing that I think the member states, each country must think about how much, and we have started that conversation, and that's when I was talking about the rules of origin earlier. We are talking about what should be the value of non-originating materials, the VNOM, and the value of non-originating material in order for that motor vehicle to qualify for preferential treatment when it goes into intra-Africa trade. There are countries that are saying 40%, because already they are doing a 60% of the motor vehicle within their borders. There are countries that are saying 70%. There are countries that are saying 80%. I think Uganda, Rwanda, they are still on 80%. 80% of the kira is the value of non-originating parts. 20% is from within. For South Africa, I think they are doing now 70 or nearly 80% of the motor vehicle. But the majority of the countries are on 40, 60%, 40 to 60% of the motor vehicle. So you cannot discount the foreign firms. They have the technology. You'll still need a parenting. But the key thing is, what are you going to grow? You are going to grow other industries that will become suppliers to the foreign company. That is the whole essence of global value chain. It's not that no one is paying attention to the local companies. In any case, my little understanding of Ghana is more connected to the Western world than to the rest of Africa in terms of business, in terms of trade. That's my observation. Just observation. I haven't yet gone into the figures, but that's my observation. Therefore, even the companies that you are talking about as local actually are taking foreign capital as opposed to the resources that may be available from finance development institutions in the continent. The last 2 points are on the single currency. let me say, you said 32, there are actually 42 currencies that are circulating in the African continent, 42 currencies. Now, what we are saying now is that discussion is going to take a long time. Single currency, monetary union, and all, that's going to take a while. So what is the solution in the interim? The solution in the interim is what we have said is the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System, which we are developing the central banks, a pre-exim bank, the AFCFTA Secretariat, developing a Pan-African Payment and Settlement System where businesses in Africa will trade using their domestic currency. You quote in Ghana cedi, the buyer pays in Nigeria, in Nigerian naira. For you, you get your payment in Ghana cedi. The Nigerian importer pays in Nigerian naira. That is the system that is being developed between the central banks, Pan-African Afrexim Bank, and the AFCFTA Secretariat. The last point is on the environmental concerns. We all know the impact, climate change and so on, but we got to treat very, very, very carefully. If you look at the global environmental degradation in terms of the depletion of the ozone layer, a big part of the depletion of the ozone layer is not coming from Africa, although the impact is felt in Africa. The biggest depletion of the ozone layer is coming from the developed countries, from the EU, from the US. You can go and check the statistics. You'll find that the largest part of the depletion of the ozone layer is consumption patterns in the EU, in the US, which unfortunately have been transferred to China. China is the one that is producing now for the world. They are producing for the world, but they are producing more for the US and the EU than they are producing for Africa. So we got to, that's the debate that needs to be very, 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 very carefully analyzed. The one on environmental degradation. We can, of course, have mitigation impact, mitigation policies that we need to put in place to ensure that we have green industrialization. Thank you very much. Over, Solomon.
Silva, thank you very much. You must have answered many of the questions, but I can't agree more with you that we cannot wait for us to, have a single currency. I love the mechanisms that we're trying to put in place to fast track that. But well, it's time for me to give a final round to my panelists to speak back on some of the issues that have been raised. But I think I'll also ask. I think I'll start with Fred, Dr. Fred Muhumuza, to also speak about who is doing research for our industry to background our industrialization. I think it's a comment that it's a question also that came through from Jeremy, who said the very interesting insights on the discussion. I think we need to undertake sufficient research to inform our decisions, especially on the rule of origin, but also who is doing research to help inform our industrialization policy to ensure that our policies work as well. So Dr. Fred, I would love you to, as you're wrapping up, also speak to, the research and development issue, finding that link, who is doing that research, but also I would love you to close in on what are those 5 most important things that Africa and indeed the entire continent must do to accelerate the pace of industrialization. I would love all our panelists to address those 2 issues as they wrap up. Let me start with Dr. Fred Muhumuza.
Thank you, Solomon. And it's been a great discussion and really conversation. You would wish you see more of these as one of the 5 things you have asked for. So can we see more of these conversations? So I'm done with the first one. The second one, who is doing the research? Really, I think the research for policy is tied up in some of the conversations that Silva Ojakol has mentioned. We are still so far away from what we need to do. We just talk aggregate issues on the top. You want to say, I want to enter into the pharmaceutical industry. Do you know it? Do you understand it? What is the politics of it? The WHO, you saw how China and COVID came in. We are still having vaccines that are labeled by country. You know, this is the mess that you want to walk into as you walk into that pharmaceutical. So it is not just a question of here is a drug, I can sell it. You need to understand that. And that is not, we are not talking about chemists here and biologists. You're talking about political scientists. You're talking about social scientists. You're talking about journalists who will understand who is the deal maker here, who is the gatekeeper, who stops things, who breaks deals, who funds deals. Understanding that research is beyond what is happening in the lab, but it's critical if your lab is to succeed. So I think that detail is missing, and as Silva has put it, the pharmaceutical, we don't have to produce the entire drug. I've drummed this in, walk the Indian route. You say, guys, do your research, get your patents, give me the deal to roll out the vaccines. I'm going to be rolling them out in their millions per day. Remember, each COVID vaccine is how much? So if I roll them out in millions per day, and because I'm the one producing and rolling them out, I'm being given $5 for each vaccine, I don't mind who takes the other 50. My 5 times the 500 million I'm rolling out in a month is good money for Africa. So you need to walk into that space. And on that, I also want to pick the issue of environment. It also offers opportunities. I was amazed on the ships that got stuck in the Suez Canal earlier in the year. A number of those ships actually had live cows. So while people were sorting out who should go first when they finally the blocking ship is removed, priority went to those ships wherever they were that had live animals. Now you are here, you want to process your meat and take it to Europe. Europeans are saying, no, we don't want your meat. But if you can bring live animals, and it is linked to the environment, because cows fat a lot and spoil the environment, they eject a lot of methane. So Europeans are already saying, we don't want to breed live cows here for all the 2 years or the 1 year. You breed them somewhere like we do with our flower cuttings, bring the finished animals, the live animals, but also don't process them because we can't trust you for maintaining quality. But you come and sell to us the live animals. These are the global value chain now. These guys were coming from Australia. Earlier on, another ship had sunk off the coast of Japan. It had 6,000 heads of cattle. Now we are here saying we must add value to our cattle. People are selling live cattle. Can you understand that? That's the research. I think the question is very relevant. Where is our space with global environment beginning to dictate? China is importing $800 billion worth of soybean to feed to their pork industry. They don't want you to take processed pork. No, you bring the soybean. Then for us, we'll breed the animals and process them here. Now, I will be part of that global value chain by linking it to agriculture. And this is why we want to still drum the relevancy of agriculture to industrialization. We should not just be academicians and speak nice things. We need to understand the global things. And I think that's the question of who is doing the research. To Maria, my friend, the panel doesn't have to have women in order to present the women issues. This is an aspect of gender. I want her to point out where we have misrepresenting the women in this discussion of men. And then I will be happy. But it would be good to have ladies' voices on this panel. This is not to reject the failure to find ladies, and you hinted on it. So for me, it's the journey to the market. How do you manage the market? Once again, I want to end with that conversation. When drugs are packaged, there is the active ingredient, highly specialized science. But for every active ingredient, there is the starch. The tablet you swallow is literally starch, which comes from cassava, which can come from sorghum. These guys have just put in the active ingredient to make you easily swallow the tablet to that size. So I can decide to enter the pharmaceutical industry by just making starch from Ugandan cassava, Ugandan sorghum, Ugandan millet, and link up with I don't know who is making the pharma industry. How do we link to the markets? A factory without a market is dead stock. This is why China, being what it is, even as it is closing universities and turning them into polytechnic, good strategy, and we need to be thinking at that. China is also investing in the RBI, the Road and Belt Initiative, to try and reach out to the global markets. They have taken over the Hambantota port in Sri Lanka, literally to control the southern part of the Indian Ocean, to be able to reach out to the global world. They have taken over Djibouti. They came and invested heavily. This is debt diplomacy. They invested heavily in Djibouti, the port where America had a base. The Chinese got the rights. I want to go back to the conversation of Entebbe. Why were they interested in Entebbe? Not that because we wanted to enlarge it. Uganda is very strategically located for anyone who wants to tap Africa's hinterland. Fly in your goods and dissipate them into the hinterland. Now that the standard gauge railway was found to be non-viable, fly into those things. And where can they fall? Entebbe Airport is strategically located. They targeted it. Here it is their asset. We are only negotiating what part can they take. And the agreement gives it to them entirely. We are now the ones on there. And they have also pushed us to put another Kabale airport deep in the middle of nowhere, allegedly for oil. That thing is in the middle of nowhere, and it's an international airport. Flights can drive from Guangzhou straight into that Kabale airport to go into the Congo and the DRC. Market strategies do matter. So I will end with my friend Kiza's illustration. Trade is war, sure and true. Now, once war has broken up, you don't design policies, you only apply strategies. The war is on. Policies only work before the war begins. That's why you'll have your policy of diplomatic relations, but once war is on, policies no longer work, it is strategies. What is our strategy here? And I think Silvio Jacola has spoken to many of the strategies we can do. Going beyond policies to action is going to require us going strategies, and strategies quite often are never written, but they work. People who want to wreck documents, please do. They won't work. Strategies, they will work. You can have a conversation. We are now having Saudis wanting to take 500 goats from us per week. 50,000 actually, 50,000 goats per week. Is that in a policy? It is not, but it's in a strategy. So I think going beyond policy to action is going to require us being strategic and being real on the ground. There are things we'll achieve in 2050, but can we begin that journey now? Thank you.
I love it. I love what you're saying, Fred. I'll clap for you. Thank you. Thank you so much for those submissions. Let me bring in Dr. Kiza. Dr. Julius, do you want to come in and compound your conversation with your closing remarks?
Thank you, Solomon. Thank
you. Around research and also what we can do collectively to fast track and pace up Africa's industrialization agenda. Dr. Julius, you're welcome.
Thank you very much. The correct definition of a problem, according to Chairman Mao Zedong, the correct definition of a problem supplies more than 50% of the answer to our problems. I think the fundamental question tonight must be, have we correctly defined the problem that confronts us? Maybe partially yes, maybe partially no. I want to appreciate all contributors, but permit me, I don't want to single out panelists because they were invited to do what they have done. But I want to thank Jonas Atingdui, who is defining, my friend from Ghana. You are a great story to the African story. The Ghana question is the African question. Thank you very much for pointing out this fundamental question. Why should foreign companies be given treatment that is more favorable than what we give our own local actors? This is a fundamental question, and I think we need sufficient time in the future to address this thing very, very critically, because it does hinge on our ability to succeed or fail through the Africa-wide continental free trade agreement. So let me point out two things with regard to this question. The first one is what Jonas hinted. The Africa-wide continental free trade agreement is going to result in a larger GDP, a larger gross domestic product in Africa, but not necessarily a larger gross domestic product for Africans. So you can have a larger GDP in Africa with the GDP of Africans either remaining constant or shrinking. What we want, the Africa we want, is an Africa where there's full inclusion, male and female, young and old, full participation of Africans. That is the Africa that is sustainable. And therefore, that means we must interrogate the way we handle foreign capital, the way we handle foreign companies vis-a-vis our own. The second issue I need to raise is that You see the conversation, and my friend from the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement Secretariat, please appreciate. The problem with our elites is that we have uncritically copied and pasted the language of the big economies from the spaces they have dominated and colonized, like WTO. We simply copy and paste it into our spaces. When we talk of national treatment of foreigners, we are talking of three distinctive sets of actors. There are our own citizens who have rights and privileges because they are our citizens. But second, there are foreign citizens as individuals. Third, there are foreign companies which are incorporated. To talk of national treatment of foreigners and foreign companies is to kill our economic nationalism. Yes, we need foreign capital, but this fetishism, the idea that we should worship foreigners, is something we must resolve. We can't grow our own economies. We defeat these people in their universities, in Cambridge, in Harvard, in Oxford, in all these great UCLA. We defeat them. How come they defeat us when it comes to the real governance of the economy? This is something you and I must address in our lifetime. My next point is this, namely that, and again to my brother Silva Ojakol, when you say you cannot run away from national treatment, you cannot run away from most favored nation treatment, I think you are leading us to the tempting conclusion that you must leave pie as pie. I refuse to accept that conclusion. We cannot leave pie as pie if the pie was defined in a context where there were asymmetrical power relations between the dominant powers and us. What we need to learn are the rules of guerrilla tactics in governing our economy. How, in the context of the asymmetrical power relations between them and us, how do we engage? How do we enter the competitive political economy space to ensure that actually we maximize our participation? One of the starting points is to rethink the policies we have been forced to adopt. And one of them is the full capital account liberalization. When you give national treatment to a foreign company, and then you liberalize the capital account fully, 100%, what it means is that they are coming to make money here in Ghana, in Uganda, in Liberia, in South Africa, but they are also free to take out the money without necessarily multiplying the multiplier effects of that money they have made here for the benefit of our people. That policy needs to be reversed. It was rolled out uncritically, and we made a huge mistake. But there is this issue of the rules of origin. My friend from the African Union knows that rules of origin is hybridized with the idea of the economic nationality of the economic actor, of the company, the economic nationality. But it is also hybridized with the idea of substantial transformation of products. But what is lacking is a detailed conversation. Who is a citizen, an economic citizen? And second, what constitutes substantial transformation of raw material into an intermediate or final product? I refuse to accept the idea that a fishing company, which is extracting from nature, qualifies under the rules of origin. I refuse because it is not adding substantial value addition. But my friend Ojakol is right when he says that global integrated manufacturing value chains now dominate the manufacturing landscape. It is true when we talk of Airbus or we talk of Toyota, we talk of Benz, these things are manufactured in global value chains. The fundamental question we have not yet addressed is, how do we ensure that we enter this space and chip in with substantial value addition? The manufacturer of the engine of Airbus does not get the same benefits as somebody who produces leather from cows or some other, or handkerchiefs or diapers for children flying on the plane. The more value you add, the greater the share of your benefit. So even Airbus has differential impacts on different actors. Our question as Africans is, how do we begin this journey of 1,000 miles to ensure that in our lifetime, that we expand our share of value addition, even in the context of globally integrated value chains? Now, permit me to talk about the way forward. Which way forward? Because I was told this is a critical issue. Number one, Mupanda ovyo, hula ovyo. You cannot recruit incompetent people in the civil service and expect a better outcome. So I'm inviting us to rethink the kind of people we recruit, because the civil servants, trade diplomats, have now become frontline fighters for our countries. We must recruit, and I'm uncomfortable with the dominance of one discipline, economics, in these spaces. Development, yes, there is economics, and that's important. But why do we see fewer development economists in these spaces and more neoliberal economists? Why do we see fewer political economists? I mean, like me, of course. Why do we see fewer varieties, engineers, scientists, technologists in these trade spaces? Trade is so intrusive in our development policy space that we cannot leave it to trade economists alone. We need a multidisciplinary team to be able to fight our battles. So can we rethink the kinds of civil servants we deploy to negotiate for us, to fight for us? Number two, we need to build strong institutions. The Ministry of Trade and Industry in Uganda has a committee, and that's important. But this committee is underfunded. It is understaffed. It is facilitated, sponsored by foreigners. Even when we are going to negotiate with foreigners, I want to remind us, trade is war. Biashara ni vita. You cannot use the tools of your enemy when you're going to fight the enemy and have any hope of success. Can we build strong institutions, a central command and control center coordinating our trade policy, the way we approach war? Can we plan which sectors are ready for free trade and liberalize those ones gradually? This idea of having one umbrella policy, a single undertaking as it were, liberalize everything, that is very foolish, and we made a huge mistake. Number three, can we ensure that we understand that industrialization is war? Siri ya maendeleo ni siri ya vita. Industrialization is war. That means we need to appreciate that industrialization has a national grammar. There is no way you can have a single industrial policy for all of Africa. In fact, the African Continental Free Trade Agreement as trade policy, but also trade policy with important industrial policy elements, is going to favor the better prepared African political economies. South Africa, Egypt, Mauritius, and a few others. Most of the African countries will lose out. So industrial policy has a national grammar, and we need to appreciate that. The question becomes, how are we growing our industrial policies to ensure that they are tied with the promotion of structural socioeconomic transformation in our development policy spaces? Number four, I am proposing that we appreciate that we have to invest in the hardware of industrial policy. We have to revisit the conversations on the quality of roads that we build. These narrow roads which populate Uganda are inconsistent with the needs of structural economic transformation. This idea that we lost the conversation on standard gauge railway line is a very huge loss. The Kenyans are doing better. The Chinese are doing better because the railway unlocks economic transformation. The National Planning Authority said bad roads, bad infrastructure are constraining obstacles to industrial transformation. We need to revisit that and find resources at all costs and build the standard gauge railway line, notwithstanding the short-run economics of railways, which seem to suggest that railways are not a good investment, value for money. But we have to go beyond. Industrial policy goes beyond the short-run value for money and looks at the long-term, medium and long-term value for money, not just the short-run balancing of books. Number five, we need to invest heavily in developing our human skills, our human capital. We need to train our labor force. So smart industrial policy is shifting from the spaces that are controlled by huge powers to spaces where we have room for maneuver. And that is the area of skilling our population. It is a shame that the TVET sector in Uganda is getting less than 10% of the Ministry of Education and Sports budget. This is the sector we need to strengthen, but we strengthen that sector alongside university education and other dimensions of basic education. The Chinese example of transforming universities into polytechnics is very misleading. China, on a per capita basis, is one of the leading investors in high-tech, trained PhD level. It is actually outcompeting many of the bigger economies. So this idea that they're transforming universities into polytechnics has got to be analyzed very, very critically. We need both basic. In fact, a strong basic education is a fundamental prerequisite for a strong skills-based education. We need to hybridize the Mengo School category, the Centenary College of where I went, the Kabalega, which used to have basic education hybridized. The ministry is already talking about that. I would request them to do it even more forcefully and do it even much better. Can I hasten to add a few points and then I close? We need to emphasize local content. This idea of surrendering our economic governance to foreigners doesn't make sense. We need to build local content. The laws now exist. What we don't have is the practice. The idea that salvation for Africa cannot come from overseas. Salvation for Africa has got to be homegrown. That means we must grow our own companies and we must ensure our citizens are part of the process of wealth creation in our political economies. Very finally, can we govern foreign capital by ensuring the China approach that whereas we invite you as foreign capital, we force you to transfer technology? My friends, make no mistake. Technology diffusion does not take place through the invisible hand of the market. It is driven by the visible head of public policy, by statecraft, not the laissez-faire approach. So whereas therefore we can invite foreign companies to invest as foreign direct investment, we must force them to transfer technology the way China did it. But at the same time, we must train our own. As we force foreigners to transfer technology, we must force our own to up their game. That means graduates from our universities and polytechnics must be part and parcel of our expenditure as a national economy. So when we spend on roads, on railways, on industrial parks, we must force foreigners to work with our own citizens. This has not happened in Uganda. It is not happening in many African countries, but it has been used ruthlessly in China. That's why China is able to put up a fight against the best and brightest actors in the global political economy. I end up by saying that, my friends, siri ya maendeleo ni utengenezaji, si ukulima. I respect farmers, I like food, but I'm arguing that even to guarantee your food security, you need to build effective industrialization. The secret to development is industrial transformation, not just pedestrian farming. And comparative advantage has never helped any country to attain superior socioeconomic transformation. All countries that have transformed has emphasized productivity enhancement via manufacturing, which is linked with other sectors of the economy. I want to submit, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much.
Asante sana mheshimiwa, asante sana. Tunashukuru sana. Biashara ni vita.
Biashara ni vita. Thank you very much.
Asante sana mwalimu, tunashukuru sana. Thank you very much for your submissions. And of course, we've been taking notes. We just have a couple of minutes back left. We're ending in the next 2 minutes, 3 minutes. I'll give Blanky an opportunity to also give his closing remark. Then I'll ask Godbert Mshabe to just come in and just wrap it up. Blanky, you're very welcome.
Thank you so much, Solomon. I don't want to repeat what has been said. I think what Chizan and Fred Muhumza have explained, I 100% agree with them. Just as an illustration, during the recent UN Food System Summit discussion, Brazil, one of its biggest strategies is to look at Africa's population, target Africa's market, flood it with soybean, flood it with the fish, flood it with the meat. That is the strategy a country is having and looking at Africa. On the other hand, Africa is saying, let's open up, let's just trade, benevolently just accepting anything to come. without being very strategic, to Fred's point, have deliberate policy choices that are strategic in terms of how can you actually deploy policy choices of being like protectionist, incentives that reduce competitiveness of an external firm to come and dump a product on Africa when you can actually produce it cheaper. We are not being strategic in our boardroom. We are not doing enough. And I 100% agree with Kiza and Fred that we must really create a critical mass of scientists and experts. And that goes to my next point and the last one, building the right human resource capability that is targeted. And Kiza, you explained this point extremely very well. Targeted. If you have to industrialize, you need to look at who are your financial analysts that are going to do your projection. It goes back to the research investments. Who are going to be your engineers that are going to be part of that particular team? A critical mass of scientists trained locally, internationally, but come and deployed to be able to deliver services rather than just open public service recruitment that people do business as usual. Development is happening, it's not happening, lamentation, and we just say we have liberalized our economies. We've taken the structural adjustment program without forgetting what the intention was, to create us more slaves and export everything. And we are just singing that song. When they look at us, they feel happy. We are not angry enough as a continent. We are not angry enough to be able to push these things further. We are not even strategic to be able to deploy the right human kind of resources in the right places, in the right institutions, to make sure that all these kind of targeted deals are stopped. We are not strategic enough. European recently is developing a European Green Deal, targeting Africa, looking at Africa as a huge market for its agricultural products and trying to tell us not to do a few things. We are just feeling comfortable, clapping hands because we are looking at money. We need to be more angry than what we are now to be able to change the continent. Otherwise, we are doomed. Thank you so much.
Solomon, can you allow me to say that I'm one of those angry people that I actually forced myself to participate in this conversation. I have dodged the class in order to be available for this conversation, to demonstrate to Boaz and others that I'm annoyed with us, the elites, and I'm annoyed with the absence of a critical mass of leaders to guide us. We have big eyes, but we don't see. So God, thank you for allowing me to annoy people. I hope I have at least one friend or two from this platform who will be willing to speak with me. Thank you very much, members.
Thank you very much, Julius Kiza. Boaz, you made me angry. So I also refuse to live under that mediocrity life you were talking about that we need to all get angry about. Thank you very much. From my heart to yours, thank you very much for every panelist who was part of this conversation. I can't say how excited I was listening to every little bit of it. Just to let you know, we'll be sharing with you the link to this conversation. I think I'll go back and listen to it again and get more angry about some of the issues. I also want to be, to also take this conversation to the people in power, right? To the people who are supposed to be, listening to these conversations. And I think Godba was right that we're going to have a paper that we're going to present. let me tell you guys, today I had from the very best. Listen, I paid attention and I got every little bit of it. So thank you so much for being part of this discussion. Let me now invite Godba to Mshabe to give his closing remarks, and then I'll come back to say goodbye in the next 1 minute. Godba, you're very welcome.
Yeah, thank you very much, Solomon. Thank you, everybody, for attending. Let me just close by making about 3 quick remarks. One is that I would have loved to use my notes and basically do a wrap up of what we've discussed in terms of very concrete ideas that came through in terms of what we should be able to communicate in the policy memorandum, but we don't have that time. But I want to pick the last words that were said actually between Blackie, Julius, and Fred, basically saying trade is war, industrialization is war. So in other words, nobody should live in any doubt that what we're engaged in is a war where strategy matters. And I think Fred made that point much more explicitly. And therefore, the conversation has to be at a strategic level. And I think that's why we also say that this conversation we need to try to bring it to conclusion, because we've been talking, as Daniel said and many others, that this has been a five decades conversation. We not forgetting the pre-colonial engagements that Julius talked about, but really in terms of the industrialization agenda, drawing on the failures of the 1970s. This has been a 5 decades conversation, and we have to be able to figure out how do we actually make ourselves angry enough to be able to do the things we need to do. So that's number one. Number two is to basically say that as a knowledge organization, we are going to be doing this much more, be more deliberate in terms of bringing together the different actors, the practitioners, the politicians, the different professionals that need to be engaged in this conversation, and definitely the women. Maria made a very important point about how to get the inclusiveness in terms of the discussion, bring Africa's young people in this conversation, bring the women in this conversation, and that we are not going to tire in terms of having this done. Thirdly, I think as an organization, we want to offer ourselves to the African Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat, and I want to say on that note to very specifically thank Silva Jakol, my very good friend, and of course the Secretariat and the Secretary General for creating the time to be part of this conversation, because I think Silva has shared with us very important perspectives in terms of the progress that is being made, in terms of the challenges that are being made. And therefore, as an organization, we want to offer ourselves the Secretariat to be able to partner in organizing some of these conversations, take the free trade area conversations and discussions from the limits of diplomatic circles and the international, the negotiating rooms of these international meetings. Silva has been there for quite some time, and we know the limitations that are always posed by, when you have government officials seated in one room discussing and negotiating commas and full stops and the like. I think that GLISS is happy to play a very proactive role in, one, moving those conversations from the diplomatic negotiating rooms to the public, but two, also dealing with the accountability mechanisms that Boaz talked about. The fact that we have all these leaders meeting and discussing, never ending, and quite a lot of it is mainly because the continent's people do not have control on what Silva and his team are discussing. They are really outside the conversation, and that we can be able to bridge that gap. Finally, I want to extend my sincere thanks to my colleague Dennis Ainebiona, the Minister of Trade, Industry and Cooperatives, to our panelists, Blackie, Dennis, Julius, Fred, for really giving us the best. Yes, this conversation must be able to continue. These conversations will have to continue, as Fred really said. That's one of the way forwards, that we need to move these conversations, but also make sure that they are actionable beyond the conversations. We are very, very delighted that you are able to create time and be with us, and we've heard from the best. We are much wiser, more knowledgeable than we came in. So we want to thank you most sincerely for those contributions and your perspectives. And to my friend Solomon, thank you very much for offering to moderate this session. We are very, very humbled by your offer and the time spent. And of course, to the GLISS team who have put this together, thank you very much for all the effort. And we are going to be working on the 5th roundtable, which most likely is going to be around trade and industrialization in the new year in January, and we hope you can still join us to be able to have these conversations going on across the continent. Thank you very much once again, and have a very good evening.
All right, guys, thank you. God bless Mishabe. Thank you very much. And the team from GLISS. And from me to you, you guys are the best, you know, and I think we should have more conversations like this. All right, enjoy your evening. Julius, we're sorry you missed your class. That shows how much you're angry. And Boaz, thank you very much. Share our love with your families and enjoy the rest of the day. From me, have yourselves a great, great weekend.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Bye.